Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. I am Stephen.
And I'm Daniel.
And we're going to continue our first 500-year series today, talking about Chiliasm. It is not Chiliasm. There's no chili. And also called millenarianism, millennialism, a lot of isms. But that's the topic we're going to hit today. But before we do look at the YouTube stats, and we see that there are a ton of people who are recurring viewers but not subscribers. So if you guys could do us the favor of subscribing to the channel, it helps us get into algorithms and all that and get this series out to as many people as possible. So we would appreciate it if you guys take the time to just hit the subscribe button. Also like the video if you actually like it. Leave us comments and tap the bell. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the most important of those, I would say also, is to subscribe to the channel. We do want to build the community. We have a great community going online, and really appreciate your guys' support throughout the last few years. I just saw, actually, we had an anniversary. So it's been, we started the first 500-year series in January of 2021. So we've hit the 5-year mark, and we're still just getting out of the second century. So it's been a lot.
That's a lot of content. That's more content than you'd get in a grad school course.
Yes. And little preview of things to come too, just so you guys know that running a podcast, even like this one, like our small podcast, does have costs associated with it. And it's all just been 100% coming out of our pockets. Like, so buying scholarly books, articles, because we want to make sure that when we get onto an episode, we are presenting the latest and greatest, and we're actually giving you quality content that's up to date with the Academy without ourselves physically still being like in the Academy. So down the line, we will have a way for you guys to contribute to the investment in this channel too. So that'll be
we're building. We have a website being built where we'll have some extra content, some written content. But then also a way for folks to donate if they want to.
Yeah, anything that has actually come in with this channel through like the measly like YouTube advertising revenue, or I think it's like $30 every 2 months or something like that, right? And we blow through that with just buying one book. So any help that you guys could give us in the future would be really grateful for that. So thank you so far for watching. It's been a great run, and we're going to continue full speed ahead, and we're going to get through 500 years. So, with that, I'll say before you watch this episode, if you have not yet seen our episodes on prophets in the early church and our previous episode on Montanism, that would be a really good precursor for the content we're going to talk about in this one. So be sure to go back and view those if you haven't yet, because it'll be helpful context for what we'll talk about. So with that, I just want to start us off, Dan, by defining Chiliasm for the viewers who may have, a lot of viewers that have already gone through a lot of this, right? If in their Protestant days of, being dispensationalists or whatever. So I just want to, for those who are not familiar with it, define it for them. So Chiliasm, if we were to sort of boil it all down into a nutshell, is the belief in a temporary, earthly, messianic kingdom lasting about 1,000 years, in which the righteous will physically reign on earth with Christ before the consummation of all things. So that's a good nutshell definition of what Chiliasm is, but there's a lot of different variations of that. So maybe, Dan, you want to start running us through some of those?
Yeah, well, I'll bring up you just Google this chart, but I'll bring it up for us and go through it. But, I think in the popular mind, when you think of Chiliasm, what you're really thinking of are who's the actor from the 80s who did the Left Behind series?
Put me on the spot.
Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron, yeah. Anyway, the Left Behind series and the rapture and, then the tribulation. So all these kind of terms we have in our mind, maybe like the end times and the Antichrist, the rapture, the tribulation. Those terms have kind of seeped into the popular mind as well. Some of those things are more of a Protestant thing, but you see Catholics also talking about rapture. Do we believe in that? Do we not believe in that? So it'll be important for us in that context to kind of go through this as well. But I want to bring up this little helpful chart for us. on the eschatological schemes. So basically the end times schemes that basically it boils down to 4 different major interpretations. And then within these 4 major interpretations, there's, idiosyncrasies beyond even these, but these are just kind of the general framework of the eschatological scheme. So they're broken up into non-dispensational and then dispensational. The 4 are postmillennial, so either you're a postmillennialist, or you're an amillennialist, or you're a premillennialist, or you are a pre-tribulationalist. There we go.
Yeah. Just bring it up here.
So post-millennial, we'll look at that one first. Post-millennial, basically this is those folks who would believe that we're in this millennial age now, a quote unquote 1,000-year reign right now, and during that 1,000-year reign, things are improving. We're heading upward in an upward direction, right? This was probably a really convincing theory. I would say in certain centuries of the church's history, perhaps, I think, Steve, specifically of the Eusebian era, right? Mm-hmm. Tempora Christiana, in the 4th century, when it seems like, the church is on the ascendancy. Like, okay, now the Roman Empire is Christian, and the Armenian kingdom's Christian. And Christianity just seems to be growing and gaining in influence and in dignity throughout the known world. So you can kind of see how that would be convincing, right? Like Christ comes, and through this reign of Christ, the church continues to expand and grow and become influential and all those types of stuff. And then after this period comes the second coming, the advent of Christ for a second time, to return and judge. And then immediately upon that, we go into eternity, the saved and the lost. The second, amillennial, interprets the 1,000-year reign, the millennial reign, again as the church age. It's happening literally right now. But instead of seeing this constant ascendancy, there's a little more of a descendant view to it. So the church has these high times, so let's say the first few centuries, right, of expansion through kind of the early Middle Ages, the age of faith, as we call it. We don't call it the Dark Ages, we call it the Age of Faith. So the Age of Faith is occurring, right? But then progressively down through the centuries, there's this slow decline toward an apostasy, and then the Antichrist comes, and there's a tribulation, and then Christ has to come back to rescue from that tribulation, save, judge, and then we fall into or move into eternity, either the saved or the lost. Then there is the premillennial view, where it's basically like the amillennial view, where there's kind of a slow descent towards tribulation. Then you have the return of Christ, but this return now establishes actually a physical, earthly 1,000-year kingdom, give or take, however you want to interpret the 1,000 years. Either it means 1,000 years literally, or it can mean just an age, an era of the church. A lot of Protestants, evangelical Protestants, are in this camp, premillennialists, a descendancy toward the return, apostasy, return, establishment of the kingdom, 1,000-year reign or so, and then the judgment, and then eternity, kind of thing. The final schema is the dispensationalist one, which you'll find among a lot of low church Protestants, Baptists, even among a lot of evangelicals. They're split, either dispensationalist or not dispensationalist, kind of thing. But this one is the one where we find the terminology that you would see in the Kirk Cameron movies, the rapture, right? So you have this slow descent from the first advent of Christ toward an apostasy, toward the Antichrist coming, toward tribulation. But Christ comes back to rapture those on earth, to rescue them from that tribulation. He then establishes the kingdom, and that kingdom primarily is being established to bring in the Jews, to bring in Israel, to quote-unquote fulfill the promises to the patriarchs about land and descendancy and all that that's promised in the Old Testament. So that happens during this era of the reign on earth, and then finally judgment and eternity.
Yeah, and it's important that this piece right here, like the rapture and tribulation, that they see the tribulation as kind of this definable period, and it only makes sense then that the rapture would take the righteous away to escape tribulation, right? And people can continue to be saved throughout tribulation, right? But it'd be better if you were caught up in the rapture piece of that, right? And they're caught up with Christ in the air. And then comes the return establishment on earth of the kingdom. Yeah, and the idea being that there's a promise still to the Jews, that needs to be fulfilled.
Right, and even in the dispensationalist view, that's even. Can you go back actually to the screens? Bring it back up.
Yeah,
you can. There are some who would say the rapture actually is kind of post-tribulation too, not even pre. So there's pre-tribulationists, post-tribulationists, where they move the rapture as well. But if you bring it back up, the top, back up to the top. So we'll get into a little bit more where Catholicism falls, but Catholicism falls not necessarily into a nice fit category here. We'll talk about why that is. But generally speaking, Catholicism would be amillennialist. With the variation on it.
All right.
So with that, thanks for bringing that up. So with that, we're coming hot off our Montanist episode. So we, typically Montanists were associated with this idea of the temporary earthly millennial kingdom of Christ. So Christ's second coming isn't just about judgment. It's about, he's going to establish a physical kingdom before the judgment kind of thing. Traditionally, Montanists were viewed as having and holding that doctrine. So coming off the Montanist thing, we want to do this episode. The second reason we want to do this episode, I think, is because we're in the Advent, Christmas, Epiphany season, and that whole season in the church is really about kingship. We think about Christ as priest, prophet, and king, and if you look at the liturgical year, Christ as priest, you can really see that as kind of Lent to Easter, right? The priestly ministry of Christ, the sacrificial ministry of Christ. And then you get into Pentecost and the season after Pentecost, especially in the old calendar, but the season after Pentecost is kind of the prophetic age or the prophetic time of the church era in the liturgical year. But when you come to Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany, which is what we're in now, this is like the kingship era of Christ in our liturgical calendar. So it kind of fits with the season. When you look at the first collect for Advent, in fact, before Advent begins, as you know, Christ the King is celebrated. So the last Sunday of every liturgical year is Christ the King. And then the first collect for Advent, you'll recall, reads, "Grant your faithful, we pray, Almighty God, the resolve to run forth to meet your Christ with righteous deeds at his coming." So you could be thinking, Christmas is his first coming. Then it says, "So that, gathered at his right hand, they may be worthy to possess the heavenly kingdom." So it moves very quickly for you to start to understand, no, we're talking about the second coming of Christ, actually, the coming of the kingdom, and you to be ready and prepared and on guard. And so you'll see throughout Advent then the readings, a lot of the readings are about the end times from the gospel readings. A lot of it is about being vigilant and watching and waiting because Christ is going to come like a thief in the night. So that whole theme of Christ coming back, obviously, in the second coming is important to Advent and Christmas, and then important to this topic because how do we interpret that second coming? Is it establishing a kingdom, a temporary earthly kingdom, or is it bringing eternity with it? Is the question. Okay.
And just a quick word on that too. I think we've mentioned this in our Christmas episode before, where this is one of the downsides to the sort of like domestication of Christmas and the whole nativity scene, and making it about a baby born in a sweet little baby born in a stable, away in a manger kind of a thing, instead of seeing it as Christ's first coming as kind of like a template for recognizing the season of the second coming, because you see the powers come out against him in his first coming. You see the crazy king, right, who murders all the children in Bethlehem, right, and so you have these early martyrs, and it's like the demonic powers are missing it. What's going on, right? The angels are coming and they're announcing what's going on. They're moving people around by dreams and visions, and so it's actually a very the first coming of Christ is an apocalyptic scene, but we sort of miss that when we domesticate the holiday in a way. And the church is always in its collects and its prayers and its reflections calling us to a recognition of how apocalyptic this first coming was, because it's going to be like that in a second coming, right?
Right. Yeah. And again, that whole kingly monarchic ethos of this season, the Magi, what are they going out to see? They're going out to see a king.
The gathering of Jews and
it's
Gentiles.
About going to
right.
see. Yeah. All of that is there. So a great time to have this episode for that reason. Also, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all our viewers. The other reason I wanted to fit this episode in too is because politically speaking, there's this huge topic going on in America about Zionism, Jewish Zionism, Christian Zionism. A lot of political figures, conservative political figures, support the modern state of Israel kind of thing, and we do that because we know that there's going to be this reign of Christ that's going to be established there, and so certain things have to happen with Israel in order for that reign to happen, and all of that. So it's just a relevant topic for people to also think about the church's social doctrine. What do we think about the connection between the church and the state and politics as well? So I think
and you'll see that reflected too with like big Catholic names that are caught up in the political sphere. When these assumptions of Christian Zionism or Jewish Zionism, or whatever, again, irrespective of like American politics and who we should be allies with, who cares about that? It's more focused on this spiritual dimension, this theological dimension of Christian Zionism that you find in dispensationalist circles, and it has been nice to see the big name Catholics that are on the political sphere like deafeningly silent, like in a way on some of this stuff. Like so you think of like Daily Wire type people like Michael Knowles, like Matt Walsh, taking this more like neutral position, like kind of thing. It's like I would hope that it's kind of because again their Catholic framework isn't fitting into a lot of that kind of putting theological meaning to what's happening, say, with like Israel and Gaza and Palestine and all that kind of stuff, but that there's just a much bigger picture. So, yeah.
So with that, I think that is, I think I just wanted to explain why the episode before we really dove into it.
Sure. Yeah, and so setting the stage. So we're second century Christianity is coming out of, say, a Second Temple Jewish era. And so we always go back to Second Temple Judaism to form kind of the backdrop to what's going on with the Christian movement and how it's interfacing with this new emergent rabbinical movement. And so there's sort of three things that I just jotted down for our audience to kind of keep in mind to like, well, where would like a Christian Chiliasm, where would Christian Chiliasm come from, right? And what problem is that solving for them? And if you think about in Second Temple Judaism, Jews were grappling with concepts of just justice, and the Jewish concept of justice is like, hey, the righteous will eat the fruit of the land. Right? It's like the righteous are going to inherit the land, and they're going to live in this kingdom of peace and bliss, the kingdom of David, right? And so the fact that Jewish thinkers like scribes and theologians they're looking at the current situation where the Jews have been conquered time and time again, and it just seems like the righteous are not eating the fruits of the land, right? They're not getting all the earthly benefits that they should get of blessedness in this age. And yet there's so many unrighteous that are, and that's not just. And so with God being a God of justice, there's this question of like, how is God going to bring justice to this situation? Because that's not just, right? And then you also have the Pharisaic emphasis on the resurrection of the body. So there is going to be like, you have to enjoy the fruits of the earth with your body. Like, right. The body is not inconsequential.
The promises are for the body. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the final thing, the third thing, the stream that is in all of Second Temple Judaism is the centrality of Jerusalem in the entire story of salvation. So when you take those three things of grappling with justice, with inheriting the land, the resurrection of the body and the importance and the place of the body in that blessedness, and then finally the centrality of Jerusalem. And when you take those three things, you can kind of see how a Christian Chiliasm sort of satisfies the demands of those three longings in Second Temple Judaism.
Yeah, it does, because don't think, I think as Christians, we automatically assume when we hear the word resurrection, we think, oh, eternity. Like, no, for let's say the Pharisees, for example, they viewed resurrection as a way to fulfill the promises that God has been promising all these centuries to the Jewish people, the Israelites. So I think that's important.
Right. And Christians in the second century are going to be getting this from the rabbis. They're going to say, well, we're not seeing the messianic promises, right? We're not seeing the righteous eating the fruit of the land, the unrighteous not.
So how could Jesus be Messiah?
Right. We haven't seen a general resurrection of the body, and Jerusalem is fallen. I mean, the temple's gone. So what's going on, right? So quite frankly, like the going and preaching to the Jews that the Messiah has come, you can see why to them, like, what are you talking about, right? So enter in a voice like the Apostle John. So I think a good way to set the stage for everything we're going to talk about after this with the fathers is to just truly read the key passage from Scripture that all of this is sort of based on and where most of the debate is happening, and that's Revelation chapter 20. I want to see, should I read the whole chapter, or should I only do a certain subset of verses? I probably should.
I think the first section, before you get to the parts about the two resurrections, maybe.
Okay, Revelation 20. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it, and sealed it over him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be let out for a little while. And then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom judgment was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life, and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who shares in the first resurrection. Over such, the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and they shall reign with him 1,000 years. Just stop there?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So it's literally from that section of the book of Revelation, and literally nowhere else in the New Testament that you have this growing idea in the early church, and then even now up to modern times, of literally a physical 1,000-year reign of Christ. You have to take that and you have to piece it together with pieces of Isaiah and Daniel to come up with a full schema. But as far as the New Testament is concerned, that section alone is used in defense of Chiliasm, or what we're calling Chiliasm, millenarianism or millennialism, all the ism.
Yeah. So from there, again, just with that cursory reading, with all the stuff we just mentioned in Second Temple Judaism in the background, and then finally going through the early writers of the 2nd century, and moving all the way through, even the 3rd century and up to Eusebian times, typical scholarship, or say traditional scholarship, has sort of interpreted the development of Christian eschatology in the early church as going from early Chiliasm to something else by Eusebius's time, which is an immediate rapture to heaven for the righteous after death. And so that has been the standard narrative. That's sort of been when you interface with Protestants as well, who read the Fathers and all that. That's usually, you can find, is an assumption that they have in their minds. And so someone like Eusebius, a figure like Eusebius, who comes later and says that some of these early writers who showed chiliastic tendencies, it was more out of ignorance than anything else, not because they inherited it from the apostles, right? Well, that's not going to be taken very nicely, by modern Protestant readers, who encounter Eusebius. And so it also then reinforces this like thesis of like the Constantinian revolution thesis, that everything sort of changes right there in that 4th century with Constantine, where a kind of a Platonism takes over Christian eschatology, and now we're just being, our souls get released after death and we go to heaven, So that's been typical scholarship, but fairly recently, was in the 90s that Charles Hill's book came out, or was it more recent than that?
So the book that kind of undergirds a lot of our discussion today is Charles E. Hill's book, 2001 publication date.
Oh, okay.
And it's ready. It's ready in a second edition. I don't think it's in the 3rd edition yet. Second edition, but it's for our viewers. It's this one, Regnum Caelorum. I think if you're wanting to know more about this topic, this would be the first book you would want to pick up, because it's going to lead you to all the primary sources and secondary sources that you would need to understand. So we use this book to undergird this episode for us. After reading the book, I really enjoyed the book. First off, I think there's a lot of good points and connections that Hill makes that I had not made before. I had come to Hill's book thinking that Chiliasm was kind of a dominant view, because that's what you hear out there, like, oh no, the early Christians expected an earthly kingdom kind of thing. So I'll just read. I wrote a short little synopsis of the thesis that I'll read for us. So the thesis of Charles Hill's book: Charles Hill demonstrates a consistent link between how the fathers of the church understood the state of the soul after death and their theology of the millennial reign of Christ. So there's a connection between what happens with the soul after death and what's the interpretation of the millennial kingdom. Where we see a belief in an earthly 1,000-year reign, we also typically see a belief that the soul spends the inter-advent period in Hades. So let me say that again.
Yeah.
If you find a father who believes in a 1,000-year earthly reign, that father likely also believes that once you die, your soul is kept in Hades, or a subterranean holding tank, a cavern of the earth, basically. Those two beliefs seem to go hand in hand for the most part. Alternatively, where we see belief in a heavenly abode for the departed souls, there follows the belief that the millennial reign is occurring right now, spiritually, presently, and that only judgment and the coming of the new heavens and earth follow immediately upon the advent of Christ. So, to rephrase, those who are waiting for the second advent of Christ and eternity likely show forth also a belief that when you die, the soul is immediately with Christ. Not in Hades, but with Christ. What that means, there's going to be different interpretations to what that means, but it's not in the holding place. It's already with Christ. So, where you see that belief, you also then likely see a non-Chiliast interpretation of Revelation 20. So basically, Hill's thesis has kind of found a key for us to have some more insight, because, again, the sources are limited. They're always going to be limited in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. So sometimes scholars have to find what's a key that we can use to kind of have more insight into a certain father about what they might have believed. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the other underlying thesis in the book is that Chiliasm was not, in fact, the reigning viewpoint of the earliest church.
Yeah, so really flipping the entire traditional scholarship on its head, which is awesome. It's always nice to have it's always welcome to have a book like that, to balance out the picture and to provide counter evidence. So I think it'd be helpful for us to run through kind of what he sees as sort of those popular, misnomers.
Sure. So some of these misnomers are his. Some of them are just ones that we came up with. But there's four popular misnomers. If you want to run through the four quickly, Steve, then we can dive in, and the rest of the episode we'll spend one by one. Okay, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4.
Yeah. So first, that number 1, that millennialism was the majority teaching of the ancient church, obviously. So as you just said, he challenges that. That the non-millennialist view generally and non-millennialist interpretation of Revelation 20 was of a 3rd century provenance. So he challenges that. Third, that ancient Chiliasm was akin to modern millennialism found among various Protestant churches today. And finally, fourth, that millennialism was officially condemned in the ancient church. So those are the 4 misnomers that are going to kind of guide our discussion as we go.
Good.
So you want to start with the first
number 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, number 1.
So millennialism was the majority teaching in the ancient church, Dan. Everybody knows that, dummy.
Everybody knows it. So Chiliasm, millennialism. Kirk Cameron was there in the early church. He made a documentary and a movie about it. And that was the majority teaching, that Christ is going to come down, establish that earthly reign for a designated period of time for the purpose of fulfilling his promises to the Jews and all of that. After running through a lot of these fathers, digging into the Charles Hill's book, digging into the primary sources, the fathers themselves, reading it for yourself. It's always important, by the way, methodologically, if you're going to read a secondary source, make sure you're also going to the primary source to be your own historian as well. It's super important to do that. So, number 1. So, the fathers, the answer to that is the fathers for or against actually are about even. So, there's major theologians, big hitters on the Chiliast side, on the millennial side of the card. On the other side of the card, though, there's some big hitters that were not millennialists, that were not Chiliasts. So if we just list them, the early fathers, big hitters that were Chiliasts, that believed in the earthly reign of Christ in the inter-Advent period, Papias, and that comes from Irenaeus. Irenaeus says that Papias was a Chiliast. Justin Martyr, a big name for the 2nd century. Irenaeus himself, Irenaeus of Lyon, many could consider the theologian of the 2nd century. Tertullian, the father of Latin Christianity, and then Victorinus. Victorinus had a lot of influence on St. Augustine in many ways. Not in this topic, but in many other ways. Victorinus, another big theologian of the late 3rd century. So as far as the big hitters, yes.
Pretty good list.
That's a good list to have. Feel pretty comfortable with that list. So let's hear, I think I'll read from Justin. So where you're going to find the belief in the 1,000-year reign in Justin Martyr comes from his dialogues, the dialogue with Trypho. So recall, this text is, whether it was a real debate or not, I think we have our opinion on what it was, but it proposes itself as a debate between Justin and Trypho, an educated Jew, and they're going back and forth and arguing out the faith and the meaning of Christ and all of that. Justin argues for Chiliasm in chapters 80 and 81, so I'll just read from that section. Trypho says, I remarked to you, sir, that you are very anxious to be safe in all respects, since you cling to the Scriptures. But tell me, do you really admit that this place, Jerusalem, shall be rebuilt? And do you expect your people to be gathered together and made joyful with Christ and the patriarchs and the prophets, both the men of our nation and other proselytes who joined them before your Christ came? Or have you given way and admitted this in order to have the appearance of worsting us in these controversies? So he's kind of challenging me. Do you really believe in this kingdom that's going to come, or are you just trying to win an argument?
Do you want me to be Justin?
You can be Justin.
Justin. Wonder what he sounded like. All right, Justin.
He probably had a British accent.
I am not so miserable a fellow, Trypho, as to say one thing and think another. I admitted to you formally that I and many others are of this opinion, and believe that such will take place, as you assuredly are aware. But, on the other hand, I signified to you that many who belong to the pure and pious faith and are true Christians think otherwise. But I and others, who are right-minded Christians on all points, are assured that there will be a resurrection of the dead, and 1,000 years in Jerusalem, which will then be built, adorned, and enlarged, as the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah and others declare. There was a certain man with us, whose name was John, one of the apostles of Christ, who prophesied, by a revelation that was made to him, that those who believed in our Christ would dwell 1,000 years in Jerusalem, and that thereafter the general and, in short, the eternal resurrection and judgment of all men would likewise take place, just as our Lord also said, "They shall neither marry nor be given in marriage, but shall be equal to the angels, the children of the God of the resurrection." End quote.
Yeah, so a lot of interesting things going on here. First off, he affirms that he believes in this 1,000-year reign in Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be rebuilt. The other interesting thing, he admits that there are people of his own church, many pious people, he says, who think otherwise, who do not. So right off the bat, we already know that
it's a split.
It's a split. A split's going on here. Okay. The other cool thing is that he's getting this interpretation by reading Revelation. He uses John's revelation to say that this is in fact the case. And then finally, I would say you see the schema of millennial reign, then resurrection and judgment. Okay, that you'll see why that's significant in a bit, but it's very similar to how late Second Temple Jews thought as well. So,
and also that he's tying Revelation and the key to interpreting it as Ezekiel and Isaiah's prophecies.
Yep. Yeah, very good. I think that's it's important here because I think it's a good question. How did Justin come to this interpretation, or how did Justin come to this belief? Was it arrived at because he received it, or was it arrived at because he interpreted it?
Deduction, right?
I think, yeah. Is it deduction? I ask that because for someone like Irenaeus, who's also a Chiliast, Irenaeus is saying he received this teaching from, quote unquote, the elders, whomever that might be, the presbyters, he says, whoever that may be. Presbyters related to Papias, perhaps. Whereas Justin is saying he's kind of going back to John, the revelation, that he's kind of interpreted and come to this. I bring that up to say that among these early Chiliasts, Justin, Irenaeus, there is some evidence for them arriving at this interpretation, perhaps even in their own day. Like they may have started out not believing in it, but came to it, is what I'm trying to say, right? Because there's other instances in Justin where it seems like he rejects 1,000-year reign. So again, it all comes down to how you date some of these texts, when the final editing happened, all of that. But there is some evidence to suggest that these fathers initially weren't given this, but that they came and arrived at this interpretation later in their Christian walk, in their Christian life. So, Chiliast fathers, like some modern Protestants, certainly held that there would be marrying and begetting of children during the millennial reign, kind of to repopulate the earth. For Irenaeus, these would be those who would survive the tribulation. For somebody like Commodianus, it was the resurrected who retained kind of this natural function, which is kind of an odd thing, right? Mm-hmm. That you're resurrected and then you're begetting children as well. A little bit of an odd
I don't think Augustine would like that.
Yeah, Augustine definitely would not like that. But that's not the case for Irenaeus. That's not the case for Justin. There. So good. Okay, so big hitters on the Chiliast side. We see evidence of it in Justin's dialogue with Trypho. Now on the non-Chiliast side, who are the big hitters here? The first one, the most ancient one, would be Hermas, the shepherd of Hermas, which we've talked about quite a bit in the early 2nd century. Book of prophecy,
which formed a lot of early Christian communities, like part of the canon.
Yeah, read it in liturgy.
Read it as like scripture, right?
Yeah. So that's very important because it was widespread, widely known. So Hermas, Hippolytus is on the non-Chiliast side, Clement of Alexandria, Origen of Alexandria, Cyprian of Carthage. How's that hit you? Yeah, not too. So you had some big guys on the Chiliast side, but you've got some big names also on the non-Chiliast.
You have the father of Eastern Christian theology, right there. So you have the father of Latin Christianity with Tertullian, but you have the father of Eastern theology with Origen.
Yep, and even Hippolytus. And I guess we could say here that there seems to have been a consistent teaching in the Roman Church in particular that of non-Chiliasm. For whatever reason, in Rome, anytime you touch somebody who was from Rome or in Rome or whatever, there's a non-Chiliast take to it. So Shepherd of Hermas is an example of that. Hippolytus an example of that. Obviously, Cyprian being a Western Christian is an example of that. But there's others within the Roman Church. Yeah. Justin being an outlier from Syria, right? But yeah, so typically when you look at documents from the 2nd century, we'll get into some more, Rome, it looks like Rome was consistently non-Chiliast in their interpretation. So that's the misnomer number 1. Okay, so it's basically with big names, kind of evenly split on both sides in the earliest church. As you move through history, that's going to change. It's going to move non-Chiliast, but in the earliest church, kind of split with the big theologians.
With even one of the heavy hitters of Chiliasm mentioning the fact that it is split, I think that is a key thing to keep in mind. That it's textually recognized that that's the case on the ground. So it just won't do to say that all the the vast majority of the early Christians were Chiliasts.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think it's either Tertullian or Irenaeus, or maybe both of them, that also admit the same. I think actually it's Irenaeus. He also admits that there are many Christians who don't believe what he's about to say. He also mentions the idea of a heavenly abode of the departed soul. He in part rejects it because that's also what the Gnostics taught. So Gnostic Christians believed in the heavenly abode of the departed soul, which Irenaeus, of course, rejects. He believes in the subterranean holding of the soul until the coming of the kingdom. And partly the kingdom is there so that those souls can then rise up into that kingdom, establish themselves, and then move into eternity from there.
Good. Okay, so that's misnomer number 1. Do you have anything else to add to that, or do you want to move to misnomer?
That's good. We can move through.
All right, so misnomer number 2 is that the non-millennialist view and the non-millennialist interpretation of Revelation 20 specifically was of a 3rd century provenance. Sorry,
Right.
Wrong word.
Yeah. Right. So in other words, the non-Chiliast interpretation comes much later. The original one was there, and then the later one tries to supplant what was already kind of there. But not true. So earliest witnesses, for our listeners' sake, earliest witnesses to a non-Chiliast theology are Hegesippus, so an early father, the 2nd century, the first half of the 2nd century, possibly Clement of Rome, the Didache, which is a late 1st century document. Can you get that ready? Because I want you to read Didache 16. Didache 16. And then Ascension of Isaiah is also a 2nd century document where we see non-Chiliasm. The Apocalypse of Peter, another 2nd century document where you see non-Chiliasm. Epistola Apostolorum, which we've referenced in previous episodes, actually. In 2 different chapters in that work, you see non-Chiliasm. That is a late 2nd, probably 3rd century text. And then, if you follow Charles Hill's thesis that those who believed in the immediate heavenly abode of the departed that links you to being non-Chiliast, then you could also include Ignatius of Antioch and Polycarp of Smyrna. But that's not definitive. It's just to say that both Ignatius and Polycarp show forth the belief in an immediate heavenly abode of the soul after death. They do not believe in an intermediate Hades holding place for the soul after death. So you'll read Didache 16 after I read the source Hegesippus. So I'll read Hegesippus. This is found, folks, Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History of the Church, Book 3, Chapter 20. I really love this source for a lot of different reasons. You'll see why. All right, so Eusebius, quoting from Hegesippus, says, "But when this same Domitian, the emperor, had commanded that the descendants of David should be slain, an ancient tradition says that some of the heretics brought accusation against the descendants of Jude, said to have been the brother of the Savior, according to the flesh, on the ground that they were of the lineage of David and were related to Christ himself." Hegesippus relates these facts in the following words. "Of the family of the Lord there was still living the grandchildren of Jude, who is said to have been the Lord's brother according to the flesh. Information was given that they belonged to the family of David, and they were brought to the emperor Domitian by the evocatus, for Domitian feared the coming of Christ, as Herod also had feared the coming of Christ. And he asked them if they were descendants of David, and the grandchildren of Jude confessed that indeed they were. And when they were asked concerning Christ and his kingdom, of what sort it was, and where, and when it was to appear, they answered that it was not a temporal nor an earthly kingdom, but a heavenly and an angelic one, which would appear at the end of the world, when he should come in glory to judge the quick and the dead, and to give unto everyone according to his works. Upon hearing this, Domitian did not pass judgment against them, but, despising them as of no account, he let them go, and by a decree put a stop to the persecution of the church. But when they were released, they ruled the churches, the grandchildren of Jude, because they were witnesses and were also relatives of the Lord. And peace being established, they lived until the time of Trajan. These things are related by Hegesippus." End quote. So pretty cool, because I always love early sources that talk about the relatives of Jesus.
The family dynasty.
The family dynasty of David. So there was a fear among the Jews that if they're claiming Christ, and the Romans, that they're claiming Christ is the Davidic king, well then, should we be worried about those of his descent who are still here, who are ruling the churches? What does that mean politically for the empire and for the Jews and all of that? So it's always fascinating to hear about the relatives of Jesus and the succession lists. So Jesus left us, James and Jude, and then they had children and grandchildren. And those grandchildren, it says here in the source, that they then rose up to be bishops in the churches on account of being relatives of the Lord. So it's almost like this Davidic dynasty is there in the Palestinian church of the first and second century.
Scholar who writes some good stuff about that is Oscar Scarsani in his in the shadow of the temple, and in that one book,
Jude and the relatives of Jesus.
Yeah,
is another book.
Well, the other one that I was thinking of was Jewish Believers in Jesus, which I think, didn't Oscar Scarsani have a hand in that one too?
He's the lead editor of that book.
Yeah. So in all three of those books, if you want to read more about that, he does a really good job of showing, like, wait a second, there's like way too many people in the bishop succession list in this early period to have had that many bishops in a row. So it's like, was this ruled by like a family dynasty of 12 or something? So it's pretty interesting. You should look into that.
Yeah. Yep. Of Hebrew descent. So you see here what's going on. So it's one thing for the grandchildren of Jude to say, oh, Jesus' kingdom is not an earthly one. See, that alone wouldn't tell you that they're non-Chiliast, I don't think. Because anybody, even a Protestant evangelical would say that. Well, it's not an earthly kingdom. It's not a temporal kingdom kind of thing. because Jesus himself said that. My kingdom is not of this world. Yeah. So that's not the key here. The key is when the grandsons of Jude link the earthly kingdom with the parousia, the final judgment. So when the kingdom comes is the judgment time and then eternity. They don't leave room, in other words, for an age of a kingdom. No, it's like, no, when Jesus comes back and establishes the kingdom, that's it. We're moving on into eternity. And you see that where it says, this kingdom will appear at the end of the world when he should come in glory to judge the quick and the dead and to give everyone according to his works. We're talking about the end times now, right? We're not talking about an intermediate age. So,
which on our chart would put them somewhere with those labels, somewhere with like either post-millennial or amillennial in that schema.
Yeah, post-millennial or amillennials. Yep, very good. So I think that's just a really cool source for a lot of different reasons. So you see here what's going on. The non-Chiliast, the non-millennialists of the early church understood Christ's reign to be now, the church age. Christ is already reigning. And, if you look at the New Testament, like St. Paul, he used the past tense, like things are being subjected to Christ, but are already subject to Christ. Christ is reigning. So the non-Chiliasts of the other church are saying, no, the millennial, quote unquote, age of Christ's reign has already begun. It's happening right now. So the non-millennialists are equating heaven with the millennial kingdom. You see that not only here, but you see it in Clement chapter 50. You see it in Diognetus chapter 10. You see it in Hippolytus's commentary on Daniel. And then you see it in Cyprian as well. But before I get to that, Steve, why don't you read from the Didache? So Didache 16 was a discovered ending to the Didache. So the Didache, the original manuscripts we had, originally had 15 chapters. This final chapter had been referenced and talked about by other early fathers, but we didn't have it until we discovered it. I think it was, some random library somewhere tucked away. But we do finally have the last chapter of the Didache. And again, the Didache is a late 1st century Palestinian Christian document. So take it away, Stephen.
Watch over your life. Do not let your lamps go out, and do not be unprepared, but be ready. For you do not know the hour when our Lord is coming. Gather together frequently, seeking the things that benefit your souls. For all the time you have believed will be of no use to you if you are not found perfect in the last time. For in the last days the false prophets and corrupters will abound, and the sheep will be turned into wolves, and love will be turned into hate. For as lawlessness increases, they will hate and persecute and betray one another. And then the deceiver of the world will appear as a son of God, and will perform signs and wonders, and the earth will be delivered into his hands, and he will commit abominations, the likes of which have never happened before. And then all humankind will come to the fiery test, and many will fall away and perish. But those who endure in their faith will be saved by the accursed one himself. And then there will appear the signs of the truth. First, the sign of an opening in heaven. Then the sign of the sound of a trumpet. And third, the resurrection of the dead. But not of all. Rather, as it has been said, the Lord will come, and all his saints with him. And then the world will see the Lord coming upon the clouds of heaven.
That's it, period.
Yep. The end.
Quite a few interesting things there. A recognizable schema for us, right? You see the release of Satan. You see an antichrist. You see a tribulation for the saints. You do not see something intermediate. Again, the final trumpet is talked about, the coming of Christ, and the establishment of eternity. That's it. There's nothing beyond that, period, right? It's time of tribulation, Antichrist is coming, and then Christ comes, establishes the kingdom eternally. The other interesting thing there is how the writer references the animals. Because the great hope of the Isaiac prophecies in chapter 65, the lion laying down with the lamb, and this kind of Edenic promise of the kingdom. Well, he's saying in this time it's the opposite. And so you know that the future time, the second coming, the eternal kingdom will be the time when the Edenic promises will be fulfilled. So whereas a Chiliast, a millennialist, would place it in the millennial kingdom, the Didache here is placing it in eternity. Like whatever was prophesied about, that fulfillment is going to come along in the eternal kingdom when Christ establishes it. Anything you want to pull out of there?
Couple of things. So the first thing is that, just a comment, when you talk about like Papias being an early witness to Chiliasm, right, and he's close to the elders, and he's relaying even the sayings of Jesus that, are talking about the budding grapes, thousands upon thousands of them in the land and all that kind of stuff. Eusebius makes an interesting point where he says, but Papias, being an ignorant man, right, interpreted those sayings of Jesus literally, right? And so with Papias, he's got sayings of Jesus, and he's interpreting them and saying how certain elders have interpreted these sayings. The Didache, it's important to know that this is a document that was widely seen as coming directly. This is the tradition of the apostles. What we're writing down here and what we have here in this manual is the tradition of the apostles. I think that's interesting, to take into account.
Yeah, the full title, right? The Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles is the full title of the text. Yeah.
And that if you were to nestle the Didache into one of these kind of more modern categories that we have, postmillennialism and all that. So this would be kind of that amillennialist view of things get progressively worse prior to Christ's advent. And just in general, what was interesting about the passage is that, so a friend of ours, Joshua Charles, over at Eternal Christendom, has talked about this quite a bit. I think he's going to be releasing episodes on it and maybe even writing about it. But the idea of the passion of the church as reflecting the events of the gospel and the passion of Christ. Because you see also like how the apostles scattered away from Christ, right? When the trial came, you see here that people in the church are going to scatter and even turn against each other, right, before the coming of the kingdom. And so it's just really, really, really interesting passage.
Good stuff. Great. All right, so then I'll read from Cyprian too. So this is an example of, I want to read this, it's important because he's quoting, Cyprian is, from Revelation 20, which again is the key text. How are fathers interpreting that text specifically? And what you'll see here is that Cyprian interprets that text as a report on the current age, not a future earthly millennial reign. So Cyprian, what's his? Oh, it's odd. It's the Fortunatus. That's what it is. Ad Fortunatus. Is the text where he equates the heavenly kingdom with the millennial kingdom. Okay, so Cyprian, quote, in the Apocalypse, Revelation 20, also he says the same thing, quote, and I saw, saith he, the souls of them that were slain for the name of Jesus and the word of God. And when he had placed those who were slain in the first place, he added, saying, quote, and whosoever had not worshipped the image of the beast, neither had received his mark upon their forehead or in their hand, end quote. All of these he joins together, as seen by him at one time in the same place, and says, quote, and they lived and reigned with Christ, end quote. He says that all live and reign with Christ, not only who have been slain, but even whosoever standing in firmness of faith and in the fear of God have not worshipped the image of the beast, and have not consented to his deadly and sacrilegious edicts. In persecutions earth is shut up, but heaven is opened. Antichrist is threatening, but Christ is protecting. Death is brought in, but immortality follows. The world is taken away from him that is slain, but paradise is set for him, restored. The life of time is extinguished, but the life of eternity is realized. What a dignity it is, and what a security, to go gladly from hence, to depart gloriously in the midst of afflictions and tribulations, in a moment to close the eyes with which men in the world are looked upon, and at once to open them to look upon God and Christ. Of such a blessed departure, how great is the swiftness! You shall be suddenly taken away from the earth to be placed in the heavenly kingdoms. It behoves us to embrace these things in our mind and consideration, to meditate on these things day and night. If persecution should fall upon such a soldier of God, his virtue, prompt for battle, will not be able to be overcome." End quote.
So you can clearly see there that he has a concept of overlapping realities, where you have Christ reigning as king, while Antichrist in this world is assaulting. It's like he says, Antichrist is assaulting and Christ is protecting. You close your eyes here, you open them, where are you at? You're in the kingdom. And so there's clearly a concept that like the kingdom is happening now.
Right. Yep. And he's quoting from Revelation 20. So he's thinking in his mind of that 1,000-year reign, which is happening right now. So it's important to know here that he's writing about martyrdom in this text. He's writing to people who are confessors, basically, who may face immediate death. And he's telling them, you're going to close your eyes, but when you open them, you're in the kingdom. That's it. And he's using Revelation 20 to argue that. So again, yes to what you said, yes to him interpreting Revelation 20 in that way, but presently the kingdom's happening. He's equating the millennial kingdom with the present age, all of that together.
And also to the comfort of his flock, no doubt. He's not just saying, oh, here comes persecution, so if you're martyred, you close your eyes, you open them, you're in the kingdom. But he is expositing that Revelation 20 text to say, hey, you got those who are beheaded for the name, right? But you also you also have people who are just faithful and have not taken the mark of the beast on them, right? And have not worshipped the false image. He says both of these groups will reign, it says. And so to the comfort of his flock, for those who aren't martyrs, right? Well, what about us, right? He's saying the text is clearly showing us two groups, right, that are going to reign together in Christ's kingdom.
Whosoever should close their eyes, whoever should die, whether it's natural or unnatural, will be reigning with Christ. Yeah, good point. And that is a key text to interpret in the Fathers. Can you split that text in Revelation 20?
Right.
I
did plan on commenting on that later, but I'll just show you how this shows up in modern interpretation for a second. So if you go to Revelation 20, verse 4, so this is actually, unfortunately, this is the Catholic translation, but listen to how it says it. So then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom judgment was committed. Boom, that's one group of people, which John had already seen, right? You have the 24 elders, right? And I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received the mark on their heads or foreheads. That translation makes you think that those beheaded and those who had not worshipped the beast are the same group.
One and the same, yeah.
Now, let me read a different translation. And honestly, I find this time and time again. I know that there was a time when we had first gotten into grad school, they asked us what translations of the Bible do you have around the table, and I had said the New American Standard Version for mine, and I got giggles from the professor. But dude, as the years have gone on, more and more, every time I come across passages like these, the New American Standard Bible gets it right, like a lot of times. So,
anyway. Catholic, the red one,
No, New American. No, that's New American Bible. New American Standard.
Oh, the NASB.
The NASB.
Oh, yeah. The NASB.
Yeah. But in this case, not that it gets it right, but that it is way more like reflective of what is actually going on in the Greek, is what I find, especially as opposed to the New American translation of the church. Okay, so here's what it says. Now listen to this one. Then I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given to them. One group. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God. Second group. And those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received the mark on their forehead and on their hand. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Now, when you look at the Greek, that's the more accurate translation, because the "and those" is in the Greek. So if it was just "and," you would say, oh yeah, well it's just reiterating the people who were beheaded because they didn't worship the beast or the false image. Saying no, it's those who had been beheaded for their being faithful. But then "ke itines" is "and those," also those who had not worshipped the beast and its false image.
So it can still be interpreted still the other way, but it also it's a little bit ambiguous. But it leaves the option of interpreting it this way, and so the point being that Cyprian interprets it that way, where it's separate groups are being talked about in 3 separate groups are being talked about in Revelation 20.
And that's important because there is a stream of thought that only martyrs who die will be in blessedness, and everyone else, that's a separate question. But that's why Cyprian's important, because he's saying no, there's not a separate group, right? There's those who are beheaded. He's basically going in kind of like a hierarchy of blessedness. You kind of have the 24 elders, right? And then you have these who are also like the 24 elders in the sense that they were beheaded for the name, but then you also just have the faithful, the people who didn't capitulate.
Right. Yeah. Good stuff. So what does that mean then? If the departed soul, for the non-Chilias, the departed soul is in the heavenly abode in one sense or another, or quote unquote with Christ in one sense or another, that means there's no longer the idea of a Hades, or the idea of a perpetual Hades throughout the church age, right? There's no longer a wet subterranean holding place. I mean, that's what Hades is. It's deep in the caverns of the earth. It's dark. It's a place shale. It's a place of shadows. It's wet. Okay, all of these things, everything you would find in a cave. That's what Hades is like. For these fathers who are non-Chilias, that's out of the picture. That no longer exists for them. Rather, and this is interesting in these next couple sources we'll read, rather than a wet subterranean holding place, that wet, dark place actually becomes a place of baptism to be rescued from and put into the kingdom. And you see that the same exact thing in 2 second-century sources. You see it in Hermas, Shepherd of Hermas, Parable 9, and you see it in the Apocalypse of Peter, which is also a 2nd-century document. Then you also see it in Clement of Alexandria in his Stramata, Book 6. So we'll read through some of these. Steve, I'll take Hermas. You take Apocalypse of Peter, and then we'll finish with Clement. I'll take Clement. All right.
Now I do have to. We have a lot. I just want the audience, we have a lot of quotes. Do you want to read every single quote, or do you want to reference some, or how do you want to do this? Because I don't want to take too much time on quotes.
No, I want to take time on these because there's a lot of we can get through it. It's fine.
All right. Let's do it.
So, a Shepherd of Hermas. So, in the parables, there's a tower being built. That tower represents the church. That's all you kind of really need to know. Hermas says, or in Hermas, it says, "Why, sir," or "Why, Lord?" I asked, "did the 40 stones also ascend with those who came out of the pit, having already received the seal? Because," the Lord said, "these apostles and teachers who preach the name of the Son of God, after falling asleep in the power and faith of the Son of God, preached it not only to those who were asleep, but themselves also gave them the seal of the preaching," meaning baptism. "Accordingly, they descended with them into the water and again ascended. But these descended alive," the apostles, "and rose up again alive, whereas they who had previously fallen asleep descended dead into Hades, but rose up again alive. By these, then, were they quickened and made to know the name of the Son of God. For this reason also did they ascend with them, and were fitted along with them into the building of the tower," the church, "and untouched by the chisel, were built in along with them, for they slept in righteousness and in great purity, but only they had not received the seal. You have accordingly you have accordingly the explanation of these also. So there you see it, the apostle, not just Christ, but the apostles themselves also went back down into Hades and kind of using the water of Hades, preached the gospel and baptized the souls up into what you would call the first resurrection, right, into the heavenly kingdom. So then, likewise, another second century source, Apocalypse of Peter. Steve?
Then I will give unto my called and my chosen, whomsoever they shall ask me for, out of the torment, and will give them a fair baptism in or unto salvation, from the Acherusian lake, which men so call in the Elysian field, even a portion of righteousness with my holy ones. And I will depart, I and my chosen, rejoicing, with the patriarchs, unto mine eternal kingdom. And I will perform for them the promises which I promised them, I and my Father which is in heaven.
That's great. So this is picturing Christ going down into Hades. The Acherusian lake is Hades, the Elysian field, this wet place. And he's saying, I'm bringing up the holy ones in a fair baptism, up out of this lake, up out of this water. I bring them up. And where is he placing them? He's placing them in the eternal kingdom. And he says it's there that the patriarchs in the eternal kingdom are going to receive the promises, right? So a clear, non-Chiliasm interpretation of the kingdom.
Great.
Clement. Ready?
Clement.
This is a longer one.
This is of Alexandria, by the way.
Clement of Alexandria. Do not the scriptures show that the Lord preached the gospel to those that perished in the flood, or rather had been chained, and to those kept in ward and guard? And it has been shown also in the second book of the Stromata, his own work, that the apostles, following the Lord, preached the gospel to those in Hades. So he, too, is referencing this tradition of the apostles also going down with the Lord. For it was requisite, in my opinion, that as here, so also there, the best of the disciples should be imitators of the Master, so that he should bring to repentance those belonging to the Hebrews, and they, the Gentiles, that is, those who had lived in righteousness according to the law and philosophy, who had ended life not perfectly, but sinfully. For it was suitable to the divine administration that those possessed of greater worth in righteousness, and whose life had been preeminent, on repenting of their transgressions, though found in another place, Hades, yet being confessedly of the number of the people of God Almighty, should be saved, each one according to his individual knowledge. And, as I think, the Savior also exerts his might, because it is his work to save, which accordingly he also did by drawing to salvation those who became willing, by the preaching of the gospel, to believe on him, wherever they were. If then the Lord descended to Hades for no other reason but to preach the gospel, as he did descend, it was either to preach the gospel to all, or to the Hebrews only. If accordingly to all, then all who believe shall be saved, although they be of Gentiles, on making their profession there. So the Gentiles are professing within Hades.
He probably has in mind like the righteous Gentiles, like philosophers and things like that.
Yes, exactly. Since God's punishments are saving and disciplinary, leading to conversion, and choosing rather the repentance of them than the death of a sinner, and especially since souls, although darkened by passions, when released from their bodies are able to perceive more clearly, because of their being no longer obstructed by the paltry flesh. Finally, if then he preached only to the Jews, who wanted the knowledge and faith of the Savior, it is plain that God, since is no respecter of persons, the apostles also, as here, so also there, preached the gospel to those of the heathen who were ready for conversion. And it is well said by the shepherd of Hermas, they went down with them therefore into the water and again ascended. But these descended alive and again ascended alive. Further, the gospel says that many bodies of those that slept arose, plainly as having been translated to a better state. There took place then a universal movement and translation through the economy of the Savior. End quote. A lot of cool stuff going on there with Clement. Going down to Hades, Christ preaching the gospel, bringing up either the Hebrews and the Gentiles, or he went down there for the Hebrews, left them there, the apostles die, they come down to Hades, they rescue the Gentiles because their mission was for the Gentiles. So they're coming down, rescuing the nations from Hades after preaching the gospel. Even, he says, to those who were not yet perfected. They were still sinful, and they're getting the gospel preached to them, and they're believing, and they're ascending into the heavenly kingdom. We'll see in a bit that it's a progressive ascension as well.
And so what you're seeing there again is an overlapping set of kingdoms, basically. So it's the reign of Christ is now. This is the age, right, of the kingdom. And again, it takes a kind of an apocalyptic view of what's going on in current history to be able to perceive that that's what's going on, right? Whereas, so again, the trifo, like, we're not seeing the things, man. We're not seeing all the things that were promised. So when's that going to happen, right? But if you were a father who wanted to satisfy that, you could take the Chiliasm position to satisfy those demands, right? Or if you're you have this more apocalyptic view, as I would say, probably the writer of Revelation had, John, right? So it's sort of like Christ is reigning now. The apostles and the patriarchs are seated on the thrones, judging, right? And the people are being beheaded right now for the testimony. People are refusing to capitulate to the beast and his
Satan is being bound and released, bound and released, bound and released. Yeah, the same thing over and over. Okay, so there's that. And then I wanted to point out, we'll move a little more quickly now through these. Following the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 11 and 12, the non-Chiliasm fathers also, not just that the souls entered into the heavenly kingdom already, and they're reigning with Christ now in that millennial kingdom, but when they're in that kingdom, they're actually priests mediating in the heavenly sanctuary right now. You see this belief, if you don't see it in Hebrews, and you should, you see it certainly in the earliest fathers of the church, Clement of Rome, and then capped off by Origen of Alexandria. So I'll just read these two quotes quickly, and then we'll move through. Clement of Rome writes, "Let us set before our eyes the illustrious apostles. Peter, through unrighteous envy, endured not one or two, but numerous labors, and when he had at length suffered martyrdom, departed to the place of glory due to him. Owing to envy, Paul also obtained the reward of patient endurance after being 7 times thrown into captivity, compelled to flee, and stoned. After preaching both in the East and the West, he gained the illustrious reputation due to his faith, having taught righteousness to the whole world, and come to the extreme limit of the West, and suffered martyrdom under the prefects. Thus he was removed from the world, and went into the holy place, the sanctuary, having proved himself a striking example of patience." And then Origen of Alexandria has the famous quote from his, this is from his Exhortation of Martyrdom, I think, chapter 30. Quote, "The souls of those who have been beheaded for the testimony," quoting Revelation 20, "do not attend in vain at the heavenly altar, but mediate remission of sins to those who pray." So, in the first one with Clement, Paul is seen to be in the holy place, in the sanctuary. And the only reason to be in the holy place is to mediate in the heavenly places as a priest. And then you see Origen says it flatly, like, the souls of the departed, the martyrs, and the great righteous ones throughout history are in heaven acting as priests in the heavenly sanctuary for the remission of sins to those who are praying. Mediation.
So
I think that's just beautiful.
They envision them as Christ in the Holy of Holies, and these being priests in the sanctuary. Is that right?
Right.
The holy place.
Yep. So for the rest of this one, it's important to know that non-Chiliasts had this idea of the departed soul going to be with Christ, mediating, at least in the heavenly mansions and the heavenly kingdoms. They also had this idea that, as in Revelation 20. Not only does Revelation 20 talk about this millennial reign, it also talks about Satan and what happens with Satan. It says that Satan is thrown into the abyss, right? So these non-Chiliasm fathers then also speak about Satan already being cast down already being in Hades. Because if we're going to say that the kingdom is already happening right now, so too has Satan already been thrown down. So too is Satan chained to the earth, chained to the caverns of the earth. So I'm not going to read all of these, but they're super beautiful. So go read them. Go read the Odes of Solomon, which is basically, we've referenced it before. The Odes of Solomon is like an early Christian hymn book, basically, from the early 2nd century. Go read Odes of Solomon 17, 42, 22. Go read the Apocalypse of Peter, which we've referenced already. Melito of Sardis, we referenced in our episodes on Peripascha and the Passover and all that, the celebration of Easter. He too talks about Satan already being thrown down now and bound to the earth and bound to Hades. Origen speaks of Satan already being thrown down and bound to Hades. So all of that is important because that happens in Revelation 20. So we know that these fathers believe that Revelation 20 is talking about now in an overlapping sense throughout time and throughout history. Right.
As you were talking about the priestly reign of that was mentioned in Clement and Origen, it just struck me that has implications just theologically for liturgy, because you have Christ is shows himself as prophet, priest, king. He comes in sort of the form of prophet, right, where he preaches to the people he's persecuted, killed, right, just like all the prophets were. But then he ascends into the Holy of Holies as priest, right, and then we're waiting for him to consummate the ages and establish himself as king. But it's interesting that you're talking about how those who are serving in the holy place, right, are serving also right now in the kingdom as priests. And then when the writer of Hebrews talks about what we're doing here on earth when we gather for the Eucharist, right, that you've come to Mount Zion, like you've come to the heavenly place, right? You are now seeing like the blood, right, being spilled, and
you've come to the spirits of the just, to the souls of the righteous, made perfect.
Yeah. And so, like, just again, just as a reflection on that, like when we are gathered in the liturgy, we are tapping in directly into the millennial reign of Christ now. We are in the kingdom, and that's all over like liturgy too, and especially Eastern liturgy of like coming to the kingdom is what we're doing when we come to the altar. And it just reinforces again this early patristic view of the symbiotic, really just the ancient view of the symbiotic relationship between heaven and earth, which is again why when John is writing his Apocalypse, he's pulling back the veil of reality and showing you, the only reason you're thinking that way, for instance, Jews, the only reason you're thinking that way about salvation and justice and all that is because you're not seeing reality. Yeah. You're seeing it through your 5 senses of your body and all that, but let me pull back the veil for a second and show you what's really going on. Right.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. All right. So then the final one under this this misnomer is the idea that the intermediate state, even among the non-Chilias, so that the state of the soul is not in Hades, okay? It's with Christ, or it's in the heavenly abode, or it's mediating in the sanctuary, whatever it might be. Clement of Alexandria and certainly Origen of Alexandria both taught that this was an ongoing leveled training, that you can move up closer and closer to the divine in this afterlife, starting now. So it was a progressive thing. It wasn't like, I died, now I'm with Christ. It's like, no, I died, and now I need to go through training, and Clement of Alexandria will even say a purification. Okay, you know where I'm going with this. There's the afterlife of the soul is a time of growth into the Godhead, into the divine nature, even like it was during our time on earth. So those, in other words, who are not perfect will continue to grow and receive levels of mansions, starting even now. So we'll read from Clement of Alexandria. This is Stromata, Book 6. This idea, you have to kind of piece it together in multiple places, but Stromata, Book 6, Stromata, Book 4 also speaks of it. But here's Clement of Alexandria. According to my opinion, the grades here in the church of bishop, presbyter, and deacon are imitations of the angelic glory and of that economy which the Scriptures say awaits those who, following the footsteps of the apostles, have lived in perfection of righteousness according to the gospel. For these taken up in the clouds, the apostle, in Thessalonians writes, with first minister as deacons, then be classed in the presbyterate by promotion in glory, from glory to glory, till they grow into a perfect man. So that first paragraph is saying that here on earth, bishops, priests, deacons, that arrangement is in the heavens as well. And you can be promoted in those levels as you are trained and grow in righteousness in the heavenly places. Such, according to David, rest in the holy hill of God, in the church far on high, in which are gathered the philosophers of God, who are Israelites indeed, who are pure in heart, in whom there is no guile, who do not remain in the seventh seat, the place of rest, but are promoted through the active beneficence of the divine likeness to the heritage of beneficence, which is the 8th grade, devoting themselves to the pure vision of insatiable contemplation. And other sheep there are also, says the Lord, which are not of this fold, deemed worthy of another fold and mansion, in proportion to their faith. Though he quit the flesh, he must put off the passions, so as to be capable of reaching his own mansion. So the departed soul has put off the flesh, and now without his flesh, it's going to be easier for them to progress, right? They need to be purified and progress through to reach their own mansion that was predestined for them. Now to know is more than to believe, as to be dignified with the highest honor after being saved is greater thing than being saved. Accordingly, the believer, through great discipline, divesting himself of the passions, passes to the mansion which is better than the former one, to the greatest torment, taking with him the characteristic of repentance from the sins he has committed after baptism. He is tortured then still more, not yet or not quite attaining what he sees others to have acquired. Besides, he is also ashamed of his transgressions. The greatest torments indeed are assigned to the believer. For God's righteousness is good, and his goodness is righteous. And though the punishments cease in the course of the completion of the expiation and purification of each one of these. Whether then here or elsewhere, for no place is devoid of the beneficence of God. He again says, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. So, Clement has this idea of gradations, even for the departed soul, until the consummation. And you can grow and you can see that my mansion is there, I should be there. But through training, through purifications, through expiations, whatever that might mean, the soul needs to pass through those things. Origen of Alexandria will teach the same exact thing in the 3rd century. We'll come to that eventually. And then, of course, we know that the last point in this section is that the non-millennialists, the non-Chilias, posit the successive immediacy of the parousial judgment and the second coming. So whenever they're talking about the second coming, it's always tied to the eternal judgment, not a temporary kingdom.
Right.
Cool. So that's the first 2 misnomers.
I hope you're still with us.
I hope you're still
Good.
with us.
So, on to the third. The third misnomer is that ancient Chiliasm was akin to modern millennialism found among various Protestant churches.
Yeah, so generally speaking, yes, there were church fathers who believed in a millennial kingdom, a temporary earthly reign, intermediate reign here on earth. But there are these other glaring differences that the fathers had that modern Protestants probably would not hold to. So just showing a difference in belief there. One of those is that the ancient millennialist view was always, for the most part, adjoined to this idea of the infernal holding of the soul in Hades. So we've kind of already mentioned that, but we can read that in Tertullian. But this is reasonable, right? When you think about it, that if we know that when Christ comes, he's going to establish a temporary kingdom, well, then it would seem odd that the souls would go immediately upon death to the heavenly kingdom. It's like a retrogression. It's like, so wait, the soul goes to the heavenly abode and then is going to come back to an earthly abode? It just doesn't seem necessary, right? So it makes sense.
Well, it also seems like the pleasures of that place. If you look at like Clement, for instance, right? The pleasures of that place are better already. They'll be like the angels in heaven. They won't be given in marriage, right? But then all of a sudden it's like, well, no, come back. We're going to, get back here, the resurrection, and now eat some grapes, drink some wine, right. Like have some milk and honey.
Right. It seemed too carnal to the non-Chilias. But this is why I think Charles Hill's thesis is so strong, is that it makes reasonable sense to link those two beliefs together. That if you believe in the millennial kingdom, then you also probably believe in the souls in Hades, because that is a level up. You're leveling up when you go from Hades to the millennial reign, and then the final judgment, resurrection, and then the eternal kingdom kind of comes through after that. So instead, the Chilias thought that if Christ was not spared, this is important, if Christ was not spared going down into Hades, well, then neither should believers. Like, you're not better than your Christ, is their argument. They go so far as to even say, both Irenaeus, Tertullian, both of them call it the law of the dead. This is the law of the dead. You're going to follow after Christ. You're going to go to Hades. Even the patriarchs and prophets remain in Hades as well. So this is Tertullian in De Anima. I think it's chapter 50. Yeah, chapter 55. Quote, "With the same law of his being, Christ fully complied by remaining in Hades in the form and condition of a dead man. Nor did he ascend into the heights of heaven before descending into the lower parts of the earth, that he might there make the patriarchs and prophets partakers of himself. This being the case, you must suppose Hades to be a subterranean region, and keep at arm's length those who are too proud to believe that the souls of the faithful deserve a place in the lower regions. These persons, who are servants above their Lord and disciples above their master, would no doubt spurn to receive the comfort of the resurrection, if they must expect it in Abraham's bosom." So he's kind of making fun of those Christians. Again, there's other Christians out there who are non-Chilias. He's referencing them, saying, well, they think they're too proud. They don't go down to Hades. They're going right to heaven with Christ. Come on, even Christ went down to Hades. So,
and by the way, as someone who's spent many years studying Tertullian is pretty notorious for being in a minority position and arguing against a majority.
Yeah. So that's across the board for a lot of these Chilias. They see the souls in Hades. What's interesting in Tertullian, the less righteous souls that are in Hades ascend into this earthly kingdom. Part of the reason for the earthly kingdom to come is not necessarily for the fulfillment to the Jews. One of the reasons for the kingdom to come to earth is so that the souls in Hades can progressively resurrect. Because Hades, again, is going to be kind of a training ground to get into the millennial kingdom. So again, there's kind of a proto-purgatory kind of in view. I'll quote from Tertullian here, or if you want to read this one, Steve, against Marcion, Book 3, Chapter 25, where it says, we say that this city has been provided by God for receiving the saints on their resurrection and refreshing them with the abundance of all really spiritual blessings as a recompense for those which in the world we have either despised or lost. Of the heavenly kingdom, this is the process. After its 1,000 years are over, within which period is completed the resurrection of the saints, who rise sooner or later according to their deserts, there will ensue the destruction of the world and the conflagration of all things at the judgment,
We shall then be changed in a moment into the substance of angels, even by the investiture of an incorruptible nature, and so be removed to that kingdom in heaven.
Yeah, so again, it's sooner or later, right? There's a progression. Some will get up first, some a little bit later, according to their deserts. All that is there.
So that physical kingdom is a training ground to ascend higher, in other words.
Right, exactly. Now, in Irenaeus, the purpose of the millennial kingdom is in and of itself the training ground. That Christ is going to establish the kingdom so that he can prepare his saints to receive the glory in eternity. So again, an idea of you need a little bit more. You died in the faith, you died sealed in baptism, but you need extra training. That is Irenaeus's view of the purpose of the millennial kingdom, which would be not what Protestants think about the millennial reign. So Irenaeus says, quote, the resurrection of the just, which takes place after the coming of the Antichrist and the destruction of all the nations under his rule, in the times of which the resurrection of the righteous shall reign in the earth, waxing stronger by the sight of the Lord, and through him they shall become accustomed to partake in the glory of God the Father, and shall enjoy in the kingdom intercourse and communion with the holy angels, and union with spiritual beings, and with respect to those whom the Lord shall find in the flesh, awaiting him from heaven, and the ones who have suffered tribulation, as well as escape the hands of the wicked one. So he's saying there's going to be a resurrection into the kingdom, but they're also going to meet those who have been left over from the tribulation. They'll be in that kingdom as well. But all of them are going to be speaking and communing with angels and being trained, he says, to become accustomed to partake in the glory of the Father, getting them used to what it's going to be like in the eternal kingdom. So he continues, in the times of the kingdom, the earth has been called again by Christ to its pristine condition, and Jerusalem rebuilt after the pattern of the Jerusalem above. So that's interesting for Irenaeus. So the modern Zionists are saying, hey, we got to make sure Jerusalem's rebuilt, the temple's rebuilt, Christ is going to come down and establish a kingdom. For a lot of these early Chilias fathers, the building of the kingdom happens when Christ comes back. Like he comes back and reestablishes the Jerusalem and rebuilds Jerusalem.
What a modern dispensationalist, like evangelical Christian, right, is hoping the Jews in Israel today are going to do as a precursor to the coming of Christ. These ancient fathers are saying Christ is going to build that.
So. Exactly. Yeah, the building happens during the millennial reign, actually, instead of previous to it. So it's a little different than the modern Protestant. So Jerusalem and the temple are not rebuilt as a precursor to the millennial reign, but rather Jerusalem comes down from heaven to establish the reign, which is kind of interesting. Tertullian says this, we do confess that a kingdom is promised to us upon the earth, although before heaven, only in another state of existence, inasmuch as it will be after the resurrection for 1,000 years in the divinely built city of Jerusalem, let down from heaven, which the apostle also calls our mother from above. And, while declaring that our citizenship is in heaven, he predicates of it that it is really a city in heaven. This both Ezekiel had knowledge of, and the apostle John beheld. So, kind of interesting, right? Because the Jerusalem and the temple are being built for the kingdom itself. Jerusalem's being, but also notice that Tertullian is saying that the Jerusalem that comes down from heaven is the one that is the millennial kingdom. In Revelation, that is not the sequence. Revelation says there's a 1,000-year reign, and then the new Jerusalem descends, right? So what you see happening a lot of times in the early Chilias, that was a problem for the early Chilias. They had to redo the sequence of Revelation in order to get a millennial interpretation of Revelation. They had to take what you find in Revelation 21, Revelation 21 to 23, and they had to superimpose it onto Revelation 20, basically. And so you see that here as an example in Tertullian. Irenaeus does the same thing. A lot of the Chiliasts had to do that.
That's a super important point. Yeah, that's a super important point because again, with the traditional narrative of scholarship from Chiliasm, to a more amillennial approach or whatever, that the accusation for the non-Chiliasts is that like you're trying to shoehorn like this preconceived notion that you have of of immediate bliss. You're trying to shoehorn that into Revelation 20, and you can't do it, right? But it's like, well, that's also what they're doing, right? They have to do that, right? Change the order of things and move things around in order to make it make sense for them.
Mm-hmm. Which lends credence to the idea that the writer of Revelation did not, we'll get into that, did not intend it. Mm-hmm. But maybe Irenaeus, Tertullian, they're receiving a tradition, but it's not necessarily an interpretation of Revelation 20. Yeah. It's an independent, And then, so the last thing I would say is that the idea of a rapture in the evangelical dispensationalist sense is not found among the fathers. There is no like rapture and rescue from the tribulation, that whole idea. It just isn't anywhere, so I don't have to read anything because it's not anywhere. You don't find it anywhere. It's not there. And then we've already talked about how, in the dispensationalist sense, that the big reason for the millennial reign is the fulfillment of the promises to the Jews of old, mm-hmm. right? That all those promises and prophecies about the land and their inheritance and all that. Even among the early fathers who were Chiliasts, even they say all of that is being spiritually fulfilled in the church. Tertullian is one who says that. He references a work he wrote, is no longer extant. Otherwise, we would quote it for you. But it's called The Hope of the Faithful. And in that work, he says that he argues that all of those things that were promised are being fulfilled in the church. The church is the ultimate fulfillment of those things.
This is relevant because I actually just saw a clip of like Ted Cruz was talking to a crowd at like some Republican convention or something, and he started screaming at the top of his lungs, man, saying that we have seen in recent days like a resurgence of the heresy of supersessionism and covenant replacement theology, saying that God will not be faithful to his people. And when he says his people, he's talking about the Jew, like Jewish,
the modern Jewish,
like
people.
The modern state of Israel. And you're like, and again, this is important because when your theology is that messed up, like that's when you will use anything to justify horrendous things like war. I mean, literally to throw, like literally in his mindset, we're doing like the Lord's work, by like sending weapons around to different countries and stuff, because this is the ultimate end. It's like that's bonkers. I mean, absolutely bonkers.
Yep. All right. So the fourth misnomer, we're almost there, folks. Then we've got some. All right.
Some wrap up thoughts.
Fourth misnomer. This will go quick because it's just a comment. The idea that millennialism or Chiliasm was officially condemned in the ancient church. That seems to be untrue or unknown. We don't know if the church officially condemned the idea of an earthly reign in the ancient church. There, for some time in scholarship, there was the argument that it was condemned at the Second Ecumenical Council of Constantinople, where they enlarged the creed of the church to include the phrase, "and his kingdom will have no end." They felt like the church there was saying, hey, let's add this to the Nicene Creed, and his kingdom will have no end, as a way to combat Chiliasm. Because, of course, in Chiliast schema, that kingdom that Christ will establish on earth does end in a sense, and then judgment happens, and then the new eternal kingdom happens. So some have said, well, that was a way for the church to say, no, there is no intermediate kingdom. That it may be, but the problem is we don't have any of the proceedings, the canons, saying that extant from the Second Ecumenical Council.
That
what
was
ends up happening.
Yeah,
we don't know if that was the motivation or not to put that in, so we can't say that for sure. Of course, there's fathers and minor synods that kind of move away from the Chiliast approach, but you still have the Chiliast interpretation. You'll see it crop up here and there. What ends up happening with it is that it, or kind of organically, starts to fade from the majority view of the church, really because the heavyweight theologians come out against it when you get to the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. St. Augustine being preeminent among those theologians who completely reject the idea of a earthly, temporary kingdom. I think there's a weakness in the ancient Chiliast view, and that is the idea of the soul in Hades. I think a lot of fathers, what's this all been about, kind of thing. Like, why did Christ descend there?
Mm-hmm.
It must have done something.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that Hades continues, I think they didn't like that. And I think as you move through in the church's fight with developing rabbinic Judaism, the idea of an earthly kingdom kind of probably just seemed a little too Jewish messianic, right? It I would say maybe weakened the proclamation of the reign now that Christ already came. He did what he was supposed to do. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, kind of, thing. So I think Chiliasm, the ancient interpretation of Chiliasm, had those certain weaknesses.
Yeah, the linchpin being that, like, wait, you don't believe that Christ is reigning in his kingdom right now? That the kingdom has not been inaugurated? Like, I think to me that's the weakest part of it, is to say that Christ hasn't yet established the kingdom. It's like, well, what was he preaching about like that whole time?
Yeah, and just the dichotomy between, okay, so Christ is in heaven, it sits at the right hand of the Father, but then his saints are still kind of in the dark place, or kind of just, yeah. So, I think it'll be cool. So those are the 4 misnomers. Hope that was helpful to folks to kind of nuance and situate in context the early fathers who were both either non-Chiliast or Chiliast. We can kind of back up a little bit. I want to now just briefly, I think it's an important question to ask. What about the apostles? What view did they hold?
Right.
What view do we find in the New Testament? In the letters of St. Paul, for example, which makes up the majority of the New Testament.
Putting aside Revelation
Gospels
for the second. Yeah.
Yeah. Putting aside Revelation, what is the rest of the New Testament? What's really persuasive, and Charles Hill in his book also points this out, is that there is this amazing continuity of thought among the New Testament writers, whether you're looking at James or Paul or Book of Acts or the Gospels, on what the state of the soul is after death. Okay, so remember, that was kind of Charles Hill's key to, if we know what they think about the state of the soul after death, then we can say maybe it's likely that they then believe this. Okay, so what we can say about the New Testament is that overwhelming continuity is that the state of the soul after death is not in Hades. It is, in fact, as St. Paul would say, with Christ. And we know that Christ sits at the right hand of the Father. Okay, so leaving aside Revelation, in the New Testament, we see a belief in the heavenly abode of the soul. You can look at Luke 23, 39 to 42. We referenced already, you can look at Hebrews 12. So there's 2 separate writers. You could look at Corinthians 5:8, Philippians chapter 1. 2 Corinthians 5:8, sorry. Philippians 1:23. All of those instances are where the New Testament speaks about the soul, the state of the soul, and all of them speak to this idea of being with Christ. Now, they may also believe that it rests with Christ, or the soul sleep is a popular teaching, but it is not in Hades. We know that for sure. Okay, so that tradition among the Chiliasts of the 2nd and 3rd century does not come from the writers of the New Testament, is what we can kind of say.
By the way, just in case I don't want the comments section to fill up. We're not saying that soul sleep is an acceptable theory if you're a Catholic. But I'm just saying that soul sleep was a theory that was batted around.
And then in Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 10, Thessalonians chapter 4, 14 to 17, St. Paul seems to assume that the parousia, the second coming of Christ, brings immediate judgment and the eternal kingdom. So again, the linking together, it doesn't seem, when you're reading those two letters, it doesn't seem like, oh wait, there's going to be a kingdom, and then judgment, and then the eternal kingdom.
And by the way, go to Hades first.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to follow pretty quickly in St. Paul when you read him. And then I think it is also a good point. Jesus and St. Paul consistently teach two ages, this one and the one to come. I like that, because if there wasn't an intermediate age, Christ would have said something about it, or St. Paul would have said something about it, you would think. But when you look at Jesus, when you look at St. Paul, it's this age and the one to come. And that's it, right? So it lends itself, these kind of things lend itself to the interpretation of saying, well, yeah, they probably were non-Chiliast. That's not what they have in view. Okay. Nowhere does Jesus ever explicitly state that there's going to be this intermediate kingdom. He's always speaking of the end, be vigilant, be on watch, coming quickly kind of thing. And we're going to establish the eternal kingdom, bringing heaven to earth kind of thing.
Well, and like I said, that the kingdom of heaven is near, right? Like inaugurating the kingdom with Jesus' own preaching is really the point too. It's Jesus wouldn't have announced it that way. He would have said, hey, the kingdom of heaven is going to come, right? And so I'm preparing you for that, right? But instead he's launching the kingdom right then and there. So the millennial reign is now. It's starting. Here we go. Right? Like that's sort of the whole posture of Jesus' preaching.
All right. So then the question is, well, where does this kind of subterranean Chiliast idea come from? If we look at the ancient Israelites, the afterlife is quite ambiguous. Like we're talking about the oldest documents of the Old Testament. The oldest documents of the Old Testament, the most ancient documents of the Old Testament are ambiguous. The only document that really speaks to it, the episode with Endor, Saul and the spirit of Samuel, right? So the medium raises up the spirit of Samuel for Saul, and it says that Samuel was raised up, which maybe implies that he was down, he was below, he was below in the earth or something.
Then he says, who woke me from my slumber?
From my slumber, right? Yeah, my place of sleep. But even there, it doesn't necessarily teach Hades. It doesn't necessarily teach that the soul is alive, even that the spirit's alive, because it could be that God allowed the soul of Samuel to rise from non-existence, basically, or a medium state of existence. So even that's kind of ambiguous, right? And then you hear like things in Genesis chapter 15, the quote of, I will be laid with my ancestors, or gathered together with my ancestors upon death. Does that mean I'll be with their spirits? Or does it mean, oh no, I'm literally going to be buried. I'm going to be gathered, my bones, into an ossuary, and that ossuary is going to be set with my ancestors, kind of thing. So that's ambiguous.
The Psalms too, where they speak of Sheol.
Yeah, exactly. The Psalms speak of Sheol, right? The place of shadows, where souls go. But what's interesting about the Psalms, I've always found that when you're praying the Psalms, where it says that the dead can't praise thee. Like, so there's almost this unconscious state of the soul. The soul kind of lives in a state of between existence and non-existence is I think the point. There is no real explicit definition of what's going on with the soul in pre-exilic Israel. overall. Because even Sheol is ambiguous, and the state of the soul doesn't seem like it's a conscious soul, because it can't even praise God. What's it doing? It's a dead soul, basically in the caverns of the earth. So that changes with Second Temple Judaism. Greek influence, Persian influence brings in the idea of the eternality and consciousness of the soul, and you start to see Second Temple Judaism latch onto that, as well as the idea of resurrection, which probably has its provenance in Egypt and in Persia, and Second Temple Judaism adopting that and saying, "Oh yeah, that sounds true." So you start to see this kind of development in the idea of what is the state of the departed soul in Second Temple Judaism. Daniel 12 is the first reference to the idea of an immortal entity, that the soul is an immortal entity. And then in 4 Maccabees 13, the idea that the ancestors are gathered together starts to take on the meaning of we're gathered with the spirits of the righteous dead. So if you look at, I'll read just quickly, 4 Maccabees 13:17, it says, "For if we so die, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob will welcome us, and all the fathers will praise us." So clearly, not only are these spirits alive, they're conscious, but also they're able to praise, right? So they're praising the joining. So there's a consciousness there. There's an afterlife going on there. It almost seems jovial, like they're able to be in a jovial state. That's not Hades. So now you have in Second Temple Judaism the development of a good place of Hades, this kind of paradisical place of Hades, where it's like there's a good part of Hades, where you can experience some joy and rest in quote unquote the bosom of Abraham kind of thing. That's developing. Ironically,
which Jesus then, it's like the first one to really like get it down in the literature. He's the one to mention it.
Exactly, exactly. Actually, the first witness to that phrase, "bosom of Abraham," is the Gospels, in the Gospel of Luke. So that's kind of how it develops, and then we hear from Josephus that the Sadducees reject the resurrection, as well as the idea of punishments and rewards in Hades. So conversely, we then know that, okay, well then the Pharisees, Josephus's type, are the ones who believe in a resurrection and also rewards and punishments in Hades. So that good place of Hades is now developing in the thought of Second Temple Judaism. And then we can move quickly to, there are only 2 sources in existence, extant to us, that demonstrate the 2 things that later Christian Chiliasts demonstrate, and that is the intermediate state of the soul in Hades and the millennial earthly temporary kingdom on earth. It's 2nd Baruch and it's 4 Ezra. Those 2 sources, they're early 2nd, mid-2nd century Jewish sources that speak about the coming messianic reign. Not necessarily that the Messiah would establish the eternal kingdom even. The Messiah comes, establishes the reign for a time, the Messiah dies, and then the Messiah comes back after dying. So it's a little different of a schema there in those 2 Jewish sources. Do you want to read one of these? Why don't you read from 2nd Baruch? 2nd Baruch in chapter 23 shows the belief in Sheol or Hades, and then in chapters 72 to 74 describes the time of the millennial kingdom. I think it'd be cool to kind of hear a description of what they felt the millennial kingdom on earth would be.
Okay. Why don't you do 21 and 23? And
No, we're just going to read chapter 72 and 73, 74.
Hear now also regarding the bright lightning, which is to come at the consummation after these black waters. This is the word. After the signs have come, of which you were told before, when the nations become turbulent, and the time of my Messiah is come, he shall both summon all the nations, and some of them he shall spare, and some of them he shall slay. These things therefore shall come upon the nations which are to be spared by him. Every nation which knows not Israel, and has not trodden down the seed of Jacob, shall indeed be spared. And this because some out of every nation shall be subjected to your people. But all those who have ruled over you, or have known you, shall be given up to the sword. And it shall come to pass, when he has brought low everything that is in the world, and has sat down in peace for the age on the throne of his kingdom, that joy shall then be revealed, and rest shall appear. And then healing shall descend in dew, and disease shall withdraw, and anxiety and anguish and lamentation pass from amongst men, and gladness proceed through the whole earth. And no one shall again die untimely, nor shall any adversity suddenly befall. And judgments and abusive talk and contentions and revenges, blood and passions and envy and hatred, and whatsoever things are like these, shall go into condemnation when they are removed. For it is these very things which have filled this world with evils, and on account of these the life of man has been greatly troubled. And wild beasts shall come from the forest and minister unto men, and asps and dragons shall come forth from their holes, to submit themselves to a little child. And women shall no longer then have pain when they bear, nor shall they suffer torment when they yield the fruit of the womb. And it shall come to pass in those days that the reapers shall not grow weary, nor those that build be toil-worn. For the works shall of themselves speedily advance together with those who do them in much tranquility. For that time is the consummation of that which is corruptible, and the beginning of that which is not corruptible. Therefore those things which were predicted shall belong to it. Therefore it is far away from evils, and near to those things which die not. This is the bright lightning which came after the last dark waters.
Yeah, so I love that because it's a beautiful description of this messianic kingdom that's going to come. But notice that it's not an eternal kingdom. It's establishing like peace, and you see all the promises of Isaiah 65 are in this messianic reign. But notice that it says that it doesn't say that people won't die. It says they won't die untimely, right? So you'll have it's like Edenic, almost like you'll have an elongated life. The land has been promised to you, long life and children and blessedness, and animals are all going to get together. See, the messianic kingdom here is the physical fulfillment for the Hebrews. It's not talking about eternal life. It's just talking about this time of the kingdom, because that's what God promised to us. And so God's going to do that. That's the Messiah's purpose. And so I love that part where it says, this is the consummation of that which is corruptible and the beginning of that which is not corruptible. It's like this intermediate period of like not corruptible, but not incorruptible kind of thing, not eternal. So beyond being very beautiful description or whatever, but you see the sense of Jewish Chiliasm, that God promised us these physical promises, and he's going to do it one way or another. It's going to happen through his Messiah. You see elsewhere in the text that then the Messiah actually will then die, So it's not about, this kingdom's coming, and then the great judgment, and then the eternal, it's not that kind of schema. All right. Great. So we can we don't have to read for Ezra.
Okay. I just wanted to insert here real quick that there is, just so people know, so Hill's thesis has been well received, okay, generally speaking. There are a couple of critiques that have been offered, and so I just wanted to put that forward because, like you said, in Hill's thesis, he ties that sort of subterranean holding place to a tendency to be a Chiliast. And so, hence, if you have a father who doesn't mention anything about a millennial reign of Christ, a physical descent of a millennial reign of Christ on earth, an intermediate stage like that, but they do mention a subterranean holding, temporary holding, you might be able to infer then, that dude's probably a Chiliast, right? So that's sort of how Hill is postulating some kind of like a key, right? But it should be noted that like there are dangers there, and it can't be treated as a skeleton key. It doesn't open every door, right? But it is at least a beginning point, like you said earlier. Charles gives us a key with which to begin entering into a father's eschatology. And you can have certain assumptions about someone, right, who holds to this subterranean holding place. But there's a couple of critiques I want to bring up. So Leonard Thompson from Lawrence University, I just want to read what he said. But he said, "The neatness of Hill's organization is attractive, given the muddle of early Christian eschatology, both individual and cosmic. Yet that very neatness is bothersome. Suppose, for example, the revelation to John were chiliastic in its cosmetology, in its cosmic eschatology, and therefore embodied a variation which combined individual hope of immediate translation into heaven with a 1,000-year reign. So if a case could be made for this variation of Chiliasm, then Hill could not infer with confidence that Clement of Rome, Ignatius, Polycarp, and more especially Melito of Sardis and the Ascension of Isaiah are assuredly not Chiliastic. For his key to the author's positions on Chiliasm, the heavenly or subterranean state of the dead, wouldn't actually be unlocking that father's mind, right? So basically just to say, what if there was a variation of Chiliasm that postulated a celestial holding place before the descent, of a physical kingdom on earth?
Mm-hmm.
And actually to that point, there is an example of that view in a later document in the Apocalypse of Paul. So this is a document where it purports to be the vision that Paul talks about in his letter to, is it Corinthians?
Where he's taken up into the third heaven.
Second Corinthians, where he says, "I know a man who is taken up into the third heaven, whether in the body or not. I don't, can't say." So this purports to be Paul's vision that he wrote down and then handed off to people. Okay, but of course it's not. So this is what it says. He's being led around by an angel, by the way, through the heavens. And so he just left the third heaven, where he heard the unutterable words. "And he took me down from the third heaven and led me into the second heaven. And again, he led me on to the firmament, so now even lower than the second heaven, to that first heaven, the sky, like literally. And from the firmament he led me over to the doors of heaven. The beginning of its foundation was on the river which waters all the earth. And I asked the angel and said, 'Lord, what is this river of water?' And he said to me, 'This is Oceanus.' And suddenly I went out of heaven, and I understood that it is the light of heaven which lightens all the earth. For the land there is 7 times brighter than silver. And I said, 'Lord, what is this place?' And he said to me, 'This is the land of promise. Hast thou never heard what is written? Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. The souls therefore of the just, when they have gone out of the body, are meanwhile dismissed to this place.' And I said to the angel, 'Then this land will be manifested before the time?' The angel answered and said to me, 'When Christ, whom thou preachest, shall come to reign, by the sentence of God, the first earth will be dissolved, and this land of promise will then be revealed, and it will be like dew or cloud.'" So in other words, descending from the firmament. "And then the Lord Jesus Christ, the King eternal, will be manifested and will come with all his saints to dwell in it, and he will reign over them 1,000 years. And they will eat of the good things which I shall now show unto thee." And then he takes him through a tour of the land as it's sitting up there above the sky, and shows him like all the different fruits that they'll eat and things they'll drink and all these things. So it goes to a papyrus kind of view, right, of Jesus' parables about it. And the whole thing here is that the blessed then, when they die, they stand just outside of that kingdom and they can see it. So they're like almost anticipating it. Their mouths are watering with all the things that they're going to have. And That's then great. It'll come down for 1,000 years.
You know what's funny about that? It reminds me in Against Marcion, Tertullian talks about a prophecy of the new prophecy of the Montanists. Mm-hmm. They say that the prophecy was that God is going to show signs of the new Jerusalem coming down. Then Tertullian says, "And we have seen this in our own day, because there have been witnesses who have come back from Judea, who said they saw a city sitting in the sky above Judea, like literally, and then it dissipated. There's like just like a cool one-off in the Tertullian, kind of similar to this source.
And then the final critique was from M.J. Edwards from Oxford. She actually, I don't know if that's a man or a woman. M.J. Edwards, should have looked it up. But Edwards says basically that Edwards wasn't satisfied with his argument in the book that the fathers that were mentioned as non-Chiliast were not postulating that blessedness was only for martyrs. So just saying, like, you really, like, Hill really needed to hone in on that and make the case that that the blessedness which is mentioned, the celestial blessedness that's mentioned, is not only for martyrs, right? That there would be this other class that does go to Hades, right? So that was just one thing that Edwards mentioned they're not quite satisfied with.
Yeah.
So all of that just to say that Charles Hill's thesis definitely leveled out the playing field in scholarship on this question of were all the early fathers Chiliast kind of thing, right? And has definitely shown that no, like it is a open debate. But there are these critiques about some of the methods he uses with how you're supposed to enter into a father's mind. And so I thought that was worth at least mentioning.
Cool. Yeah, I like it. Great. So we can circle back to Revelation, I think, just really quickly to say that in Revelation, I think we could say that it seems like at least the martyrs and maybe some more of the righteous dead are already reigning, already sitting on thrones. So there's a non-Hades thing to it. The big one, I think, is the typical features of Jewish and Christian Chiliasm, which are the superabundance of produce, like you've mentioned, the animal kingdom's reconciliation and submission, human longevity, rebuilt temple or rebuilt Jerusalem, servitude of nations, return of the 10 tribes, all of those major 6 promises of the kingdom in Jewish hope, Isaiah 65 and Daniel, do not appear in Revelation 20. I think that's a really, and we mentioned it before, but I think that's a really big thing to press home, is that all that stuff is, John puts it in the eternal kingdom, the new heaven and new earth, whereas Irenaeus would say, oh no, the new earth is, Revelation 20 is talking about the new earth, but actually, other way around. So all those physical promises aren't there in Revelation 20, and then John places all those earthbound hopes in Revelation 21 and to 23. So I think in that sense, I would favor the interpretation, Revelation actually being non-Chiliast. That's the one that holds. That's the point that holds for me, I think.
And certainly non-dispensational. So, like the thing about that is that so Michael Heiser has a really good long series of episodes on his podcast, on the Naked Bible podcast. But he's also written about it, of course. But on Revelation 20 and specifically Revelation like 14 through 20, where he goes through these cycles of visions from John. But the one thing about dispensationalism is that it takes as a given that each chapter of Revelation is like this linear story of history or something, right? And so you're moving from sort of, the apostolic times to the future. Right?
Yes. The idea that Revelation's a future, talking about prophecy, future book.
Yes. Yeah. But literally in the book itself, it describes Jesus as the one who is, who was, and who is to come. It even says, "I will show you the things that will now take place." Right, meaning what I just showed you wasn't. Right? So there's all these different things, like, and just in general, scholars, when they approach apocalyptic works, they know that they're approaching a text that is layered. It's layered with the is, the was, and the yet to come. That's the whole point, is that it's not unveiling just the future. It's unveiling all of reality, past, present, and future. And so it's providing meaning not only to current events and future ones, but also past events. It's putting meaning to what happened previously. So you'll even see characters from the past show up. Like, so in the Apocalypse of Paul, like Paul goes and all of a sudden he meets Enoch, and Enoch is talking to him. And so, like, this is very common in apocalyptic literature, which John's Apocalypse clearly is. And so Heiser does a really good job, I think, very convincingly. He actually draws on the work of another scholar that he mentioned. I don't remember the name, but mentions the scholar in the podcast. But he talks about how this is a form of prophetic speech. Again, going back to our episodes on forms of prophetic speech. But prophets will give you a vision, and then they'll say, and then I was taken to this place, and I saw these things. They'll stop that vision. They'll say, and then I saw this. And our minds, we automatically think linearly. Like, okay, so that's something, this is something, that's something. But really what he's doing is he's building a tower and showing how he's basically relaying the same event in three different visions. So if you take the visions from like chapter 16 to 20, right, and you start laying them on top of each other, it's giving you another facet of the same events. And the thing about the prophets is that what their claim is that the way that things will be, they are now as well. There's this whole aspect of the is but not yet. And so every single vision, it's going to have a corollary. Every vision of the future is going to have a corollary now. That these things are also taking place now. Right? So you're seeing, like just like we saw with the Maccabees, the ones who were beheaded, for not worshiping the beast and its false image and remained faithful unto death. So we're seeing it now with the apostles. And by the way, you will see it continuing in the future.
Well, John himself, you talk about Antichrist, but I tell you, even now, many Antichrists have gone
in the world. Exactly. Yeah. And so that whole it's tight. I'll give it to the dispensation. It's a very tight, neat like system that they've put in place, but it just falls apart when you really understand how apocalyptic literature was written and how it's structured. That it usually is cyclical, and it keeps showing you what happened in the past, what's going on now, what's going to happen in the future, and it's very similar. Like I said about in the beginning about the nativity, like as Christ came once, so it will be again, right? That the powers of the earth are going to gather against him and against his saints and murder them, and there's going to be angels and visions and these kinds of things.
And even look at Revelation. Compare Revelation 12 with Revelation 20. It's almost like the same things are happening again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a lot of the visions are visions of the same event, just twice iterated. And you see it in Daniel too. Daniel has like visions of the successive empires. Well, he has that a couple times, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Now, I think too that convincingly, I side for sure with Cyprian in how he received the Greek as it's written in Revelation 20. To say that these are separate groups. These are not separate, but distinct groups, right? You've got the patriarchs and apostles here. You have those who are beheaded, right, who've earned a place. But then you also just have those who didn't have the opportunity for martyrdom, but yet remained faithful and didn't capitulate. And all of those together are in this celestial state prior to the full consummation of the ages. But, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think, and that's not a new. Heiser's isn't a new interpretation. The overlapping layers, we see it. You can go read it. In fact, in St. Augustine talks about how to interpret Revelation, book 20:17. He writes, quote, "No doubt, though this book is called the Apocalypse, there are in it many obscure passages to exercise the mind of the reader, and there are few passages so plain as to assist us in the interpretation of the others, even though we take pains. And this difficulty is increased by the repetition of the same things in forms so different that the things referred to seem to be different, although in fact they are only differently stated. But in the words, quote, God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, but there shall be no more pain, there is so manifest a reference to the future world and the immortality and eternity of the saints. For only then and only there shall such a condition be realized, that if we think this obscure, we need not expect to find anything plain in any part of Scripture." So he's actually writing against the Chilias, who have to take those things that you find in Revelation 21, 22, 23, and put them in Revelation 20. Mm-hmm. He's saying, well, clearly the wiping away of all the tears, that's for the eternal kingdom. It can't be for now. But the reference there is, it's seemingly saying different things, but it's actually saying the same things differently.
Yeah, so he picks right up on that.
Yeah. I think you could also point to the analogy Christ uses for the coming of the end times, the labor pains. Because in labor pain, the waxing and waning, right? So if you think about the amillennialist view. It's like kind of this kind of almost like progressive trend descent toward tribulation. But in reality, and this would actually be the Catholic view, is that through time, this waning and waxing is happening, but progressively probably getting worse.
Right.
So if you think about Christ's analogy of the labor pains, it's like, well, labor pains kind of start and they're okay, they go away. Then they come back and they're worse, then they go away. And that kind of trend continues to happen. There's this waxing and waning to the tribulations, to the bliss, to the tribulations, to the bliss, the anticipation, the excitement. Oh no, I'm worried because I'm in pain and it's getting worse. But then I feel, so it's like this back and forth play that's there in that analogy alone that I think is actually a really cool way to interpret and apply to the book of Revelation.
Yeah, well, nobody puts it better than the Lord. So that's
yeah. I kind of trumped everybody with Jesus.
Yeah, just threw it right down.
No, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So to that end, then that's a great pivot to like what is the Catholic position, because we've surveyed so much stuff, right?
Yeah,
we've gone through all the fathers.
Yeah, what are we? 2 hours and 20 minutes. 2 hours and 20 minutes in.
Yeah.
What'd you say this episode is going to be like 30 minutes? It'll be easy. Yeah, whatever.
I think I
all
did.
Right. So what is the official position of the church on this whole question? Kind of alluded to it there. It's kind of like a different amillennialist, but anyway, the Holy Office in 1944 officially decided that the millennialist Chiliasm view, whether it's dispensationalist or not, cannot be safely taught. That's the position of the church. That position cannot be safely taught. It was like a dubia thing, right? Where the question was asked, can this be safely taught? And the Holy Office came back and said, no. No, it cannot be safely taught. The church's theologians down through the century have been majority amillennialist, so non-Chiliast. Even the magisterial reformers, if you think about the Reformation, the Martin Luthers of the world, they were amillennialists. They were non-Chiliast. They did not believe in an earthly kingdom. But here's, do you want to read this from the current Catechism of the Catholic Church for us? I think the Catechism is a bit more forceful than just saying it can't be safely taught.
Okay. The Antichrist's deception already begins to take shape in the world every time the claim is made to realize within history that messianic hope which can only be realized beyond history through the eschatological judgment. The Church has rejected even modified forms of this falsification of the kingdom to come under the name of millenarianism, especially the intrinsically perverse political form of a secular messianism. The Church will enter the glory of the kingdom only through this final Passover, when she will follow her Lord in his death and resurrection. The kingdom will be fulfilled then, not by a historic triumph of the Church through a progressive ascendancy, but only by God's victory over the final unleashing of evil, which will cause his bride to come down from heaven. God's triumph over the revolt of evil will take the form of the last judgment after the final cosmic upheaval of this passing world. End quote. You gotta love the Catechism, dude. Just like so perfect.
Yeah, it is because it's specific without being. It's specific enough. You know what I mean? Like it leaves room for mystery, but it knows what it knows. Like here's what we know. And so you see in this the premillennialist view being rejected, but also the postmillennialist view that there's going to be this church ascending all the way through time, and even that's rejected.
Views on our chart that in the beginning of the episode. That's for people. That's the view at the top, right, and the third one down. So those two being eliminated.
And of course, the dispensationalist is right out.
That's why it's at the bottom.
So that's the church's take, right? So you Catholics out there, you're non-Chiliasts, okay?
That's right. Wear it like a badge of honor.
Yeah. A couple Catholic takeaways we can end with. One of them is that I hope we were clear enough throughout that among whether you were a Chilias father or a non-Chilias father, you also kind of had this idea that we're not yet ready for heaven. Like, I'm not saying it's purgatory. I'm not saying the doctrine of purgatory is there in the 2nd century. But I am saying that the seeds of that doctrine are pervasive, almost. Because on both sides of this particular belief, you see the need for church fathers to say, there's got to be some extra training that goes along. The soul needs to still learn. Or as in Clement of Alexandria, the soul needs to be purified or purged and go through an expiation a little bit. For Irenaeus, it was like, oh no, the millennial kingdom is that time of preparing the soul. The soul, now that it's reunited with its body, prepare them for the glory to come. So this idea of like a need to prepare beyond just this life is kind of hitting for a lot of fathers.
Well, hence the privileged place of martyrs in both sides of this theological discussion or debate, if you want to call it that. They both would agree that the martyrs have a privileged place. It's just that, how privileged, right? Are the martyrs here and us way over here, or are we kind of together, but there's a hierarchy in that, right? But everybody unanimously would agree that the martyrs have achieved something of blessedness that the normal person who remained faithful and died will not. Right away.
Yeah.
And that shows you that, well, why? Well, that's because they already went through a kind of purging, in giving their own life for Christ that you haven't done, right? And where is that in Hebrews where he says, you haven't yet suffered.
Shed your blood. You haven't yet
unto shedding your own blood, right?
Yeah.
So chill out, right? And so there's a sense in which, well, no, I'm not going to be immediately just translated to where a martyr is, like to their place. I'm not going to be immediately translated to where like an apostle is, right? There's a training I still have to go through. I have to be brought up to speed. I'm not over there with the heathen for sure, but I am somewhere here, and Christ is going to bring to completion that work which He has begun in me. And so there is that you cannot say. If you're an honest Protestant scholar, you cannot say that the early church fathers had this kind of flattened out view that we see in modern Protestantism of like heaven or hell, which one? And that there's no sort of complication to blessedness in the next life.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally, man. So we're not saying purgatory, but there's something else causing these fathers to lean that way. And I mean, I like what Clement, how he put it. It's not a different state. Even it is in the heavenly abode. You are generally with Christ and the saints, like you said, but at a different level, and you need to grow up into the fullness of what you are destined to the mansion you're destined to take, basically. And there's room for that afterlife. I think, what complicates it for a lot of folks in their mind when they think of the Catholic purgatory, they think of, it's a third state. It's a third separate state, like a Hades, that people go to, and that's for Catholicism's own fault, because a lot of theologians did teach that. It is a third place.
And popular art.
And popular art and all of that, right? And visionaries and all the private revelations and all that. But when you look at, again, the Catholic Catechism, it's a state of purification.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And that's why many Orthodox can get up with that. They would agree as well that we need a final twinkling, a final purification before we enter into the eternal kingdom. So don't let private revelation throughout the ages get in the way of what the Church actually has succinctly said about purgatory.
And I would say that the Church has safely said that it is both penal and purgative, that there is a cleansing aspect to this state, but also a penal aspect to it. That, you do have to suffer some consequences of the sins and the attachments that you formed to things during this life, because this life is purgatory. That's what this is.
But that's exactly. I mean,
this is the beginning.
That's
of
St. John of the Cross, my friend.
Yeah.
St. John of the Cross, all up and down, dark night of the soul. refers to this life as this is your start of purgatory.
Right
and it doesn't
now.
end just because you die.
Right.
Why would
It's
that
very
end?
arbitrary. Right.
Yeah, it's arbitrary. That's why I like Clement, because he says that when you're outside of the body, now the soul can really pay attention.
We
Like,
are not
this
Gnostics.
is part, and he says this is part of the economy
Yes.
of salvation.
Yes.
Like the body's the first part, the accepting of the gospel and the senses and bringing all that in. But then now, once you've been trained there, the body leaves and you finalize that training of the soul apart from the body, apart from the passions. I think that makes a heck of a lot of sense. And that's exactly what St. John of the Cross says. He said, your purgatory is right now. We're starting it here. And then it just continues until the eternal kingdom, I think makes a lot of sense.
That's why that schema of heaven, hell, you die, heaven, hell, and you'll and
The billboards, are you going to heaven? You're going to
right, like that.
call 1-800, whatever.
That is Gnostic. Like that is assuredly Gnostic, because it's showing that we all have this just like divine spark inside of us that's equal, like 100% equal, right? And there's no difference between in blessedness, right, or the achieving of blessedness between me and martyr. Like, yes, there is. Yes, there is, because the body matters, and what we did in the body matters, and it has ramifications for your soul. So it's kind of frustrating to no end when someone would adopt a view like that. I remember I heard it was years ago when we had first come out of kind of Protestantism, that there was a feller we used to know in Protestantism that he said that I posted something about John Chrysostom online. He goes, "Man, love John Chrysostom, but I'm just as much a saint as he is." And I was just like, yes, you are a member of the church, right? Maybe. But let's assume that, right? Yes, I understand what sense maybe you're saying it, but I also know what sense you really mean that, and you're trying to say he's not above me. And you're like, well, that's not a proper understanding of human anthropology from a Christian perspective, an Orthodox Christian perspective, and a biblical one. That no, you're not. No, you're not. Like there are those who are more venerable than others. Jesus himself says it. He's like, of those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist, right? Like, and that has ramifications. So anyway.
Yep. And the gradations of the mansions, but
right. So purgatory is true, and also we're going to be wrapping up. Actually, I'm excited to say, after this almost 3-hour episode, we are going to be wrapping up the 2nd century. We feel at this point.
Wait! You didn't want to have fun with your little 1,000-year interpretation?
No, that's okay. It's
okay.
It'll get thrown out.
Yeah. Do you want me to read the summary that we wrote up of the church's position, or
bring it home, and then
I'll bring it home
just
with that.
Survey where we're going.
Okay. So this kind of just wrote out a quick summary of the church's position on Chiliasm, or non-Chiliasm, I should say. Christ has, and is even now, putting all things in subjection to himself. This subjection was inaugurated in the spiritual realm at the cross. The 1,000-year reign in Revelation 20 is the age referenced by St. Paul in Ephesians 1:10 as, quote, in the fullness of time. We are in that fullness of time, the age of the millennial kingdom. Jesus has declared the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and that kingdom and that reign is realized in the temporal realm, with each conversion, each liturgy, each merciful act. Conversions, liturgies, and works of mercy send convulsions through the spiritual realm. Christ's first advent, then, struck at the root spiritual problem underlying Israel's struggle with evil through time. Israel was always seen trying to deal with spiritual problems temporally. What else could be expected of a temporal kingdom? This is why Christ's reign had to be different than the one most of the Jews of his day expected. The warring, conquering Messiah of Jewish hope was in fact a lamb that was slain. Christ rejects political messiahship to Pilate's face for a reason. The cross is his throne. This understanding of Christ's inter-advent kingdom is so fundamental that some have forgotten. By the cross, Satan was bound to the earth, its atmosphere, and its cavities. This is the present reality. Satan is no longer allowed into the throne room to accuse the brethren. He is allowed, however, to roam the earth like a lion. He will be allowed to usher in times of tribulation and a time of tribulation through his son, the Antichrist. As John has it, quote, he must be let out for a little while, end quote. After this little while, Christ's return in glory will be precisely that, glorified. Full, swift, decisive. The kingdom that has already been inaugurated in the spiritual realm will break into the temporal. And, as the creed of the church reads, this kingdom will have no end.
There it is.
That's it. That's it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, yeah, like I said, we're going to be wrapping up our journey through the 2nd century. Our next episode will do that. Up to this point, we've been on the ground, looking at, all these different things about the Christian movement, different heresies, factions, trends, development of theology, but then also turned around and looked at the Christians through Roman eyes, talked about Roman religion. Of course, we didn't profile every single big father, right? That's not the point. The point is really to hit the major topics and to like swim through those fathers. And so I think we've definitely accomplished that for the 2nd century. And so what we want to do to round it out is to take more of like a step up, like from above, like 30,000 foot view. How and where is the movement growing, and what cities is it now cropping up, and how many Christians are in each city when we are talking about this era? And that will be a way of sort of taking us into, also round out like what were the major topics, what are the major readings, what are the major fathers.
Yeah. And just the state of the church at the end of the 2nd century, really.
Yeah, where are we, right? And then that'll be a good segue for us to get into 3rd century topics. So it's been a journey, but we'll look forward to that last and final episode of the 2nd century. And until then, right?
Yeah. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to all of our listeners. Thanks for supporting us and joining us on this journey that, frankly, we love. I mean, this is a hobby of ours, a love of ours, a passion of ours. So we love that you're tagging along with us on it.
Absolutely. Thank you.